Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 72nd live stream from the MisfitGamersStudios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode of Deeper Discussions, we have a very interesting topic. We're going to be talking about the history and some of our personal viewpoints on removing curses and cursed items. This is something that's kind of been around pretty much the entire history of D&D, and it has evolved quite a bit. So we're going to kind of go deeper into what the history is, how it's evolved over each of the editions, and then we're going to give some of our own unique insights onto our experiences and what we kind of like to do with curses. Also, if you guys haven't noticed yet, for some of the ones that have stuck around for a little bit, we do have a new title for Fridays, or at least single topic streams. So we are going away from the idea of calling these deeper dives. It's a little bit too casual, it's a little bit too common. So we are going to be playing around when we have a single topic that we're going to be discussing on Fridays. That is going to now be called deeper dives or deeper discussions. And we will be coming up with other names for different series as we come up with different topics, different categories, things like that. We have multiple topics or whatever. But yes, for anybody who's stuck around, that is going to be the name. Let us know in the comments on YouTube, let us know in chat, or let us know in the Discord what you guys think of the new name. That's going to be something new. We're going to be updating all of the YouTube titles, so all of the playlists and all of that will be updated as well. Let me go ahead and I will pop in both of those links. So if you guys want to go ahead and join into the community, there is, oh, that is not the right button. There's our Discord link if you guys are interested in joining the community, giving us some topics to discuss on chat, or to give us some homebrew ideas for Mondays. And then if you guys are interested in seeing any of our other VODs, you can go check out our YouTube channel. But yeah, that's all of our updates today. So let me go ahead and get Kage in here and we will start today's episode. What is up, my dude? How you doing?
Shalom, my friends and neighbors. It is good to be back in the studio. I'm glad that we have another chance to do a deeper dive.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited about the new name. I think it's gonna work,
dude. This is good stuff. You know, we are making progress, man.
Speaking of which, I still have not fixed chat. I realized I'm not, my light's all fucked up. I've realized that I did not fix chat. So there's still a bit of cut off there on screen.
That's fair. I do remember that.
I don't know why that's happening, though. I'm going to have to log into Stream Elements later. I'm not going to do that right now. So I forget, where did today's topic come from? Was this submitted by somebody, or was this
I think this is something that I had randomly put in the topics a while back. I had been randomly going through a lot of TikToks, Instagram posts, different things, and a lot of different ideas end up popping up in there. And some of them just honestly catch my eye. Some of them, when I see it, it sparks something in my mind. And this is one of the ones that definitely, because I'd always wanted to know, there aren't really any good rules about removing curses. There aren't really a whole lot of good rules about how you know how you can get cursed. You touch something wrong, you do something wrong. Mm-hmm. What do you do once that happens? Is there ways for people to go about it? The rituals,
it's not sponsored.
But there's all kinds of great ways, to figure out what this kind of gameplay would look like, right? Because absolutely. I definitely like playing with curses, even though it's something that I am personally scared of as a DM, because I am, if you've ever watched our streams and haven't heard me talk, I am almost always talking about player agency, right? Mm-hmm. And curses, it feels like a lot of the times it can very quickly remove your player's desire to play. And the only reason that we're even here is because people are having fun, right? Yeah. The only purpose we are doing any of this is so that you and the people that you're playing with can have a good time, right? And so if nobody's having a good time, then we're failing already. So I don't want to go too hard into it, but at the same time, there's balance to be had. If there's not something to risk, because there's not something to lose, if there's not something dangerous, then honestly, it's one of those things where does it really feel well worth it? You know what I mean? So I don't know. I definitely like the idea of this topic. I want to know more about what you think. I want to know more about what anybody in chat thinks about how would you guys go about handling giving these curses out. What's permanent? What's not permanent? You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
We were just talking before stream about one of our viewers, Cosmic. He put
the
stuff
Tiamat
about
spite.
his curse in there, and that's very interesting because that curse isn't even tied to like a weapon or an item or something like that. Which
that's tied to actions. Like that's an actual like in-game setting,
and that's a whole
curse based on the player actions and the character actions, and you bring up a good point too, because a lot of the times I think people approach curses primarily from the point of cursed items. Number one, I think hands down, most people out there are familiar with cursed items, and that's kind of where we go when we think of curses. We think there's some ancient artifact or an ancient weapon or some sort of thing out there that is calling to adventurers and getting them to grab it, so it will curse them, whether it's a spirit that wants to be released or it is some ancient entity that just wants to wreak havoc. There's always some sort of thing that happens, right? The second tier, I think you would see this in is either the spells or it's tied. I think second place is tied between the spell curse or the what do we want to call it? The storyline curse, if we want to call it that, right? In terms of second place, basically is a tie between whether or not the actual in-game spells are being used to cast curses. I think there is I think most editions had like the curse spell, but I also think equally you see this second in just lore, right? There's a town that's cursed. There's an individual. It's the BEG who has a custom curse. There's usually something like that. Cursed. And then below that, in the third category is where we're, what we were just talking about, what Cosmic had just talked about in Discord, which is this action-based curse, this role-play curse, something that based on what you've done in game, you could obtain it. Not like touching an item, it's not something about legend. It's more about you've done a deed that has caught the attention of the wrong person, and therefore you're being punished. And you need to have repentance, or you need to have some sort of understanding of what you've done, right? And those are the three levels. And you see the last one, like the idea of just a curse outside of it being a spell, or again like a plot hook. You just don't see it. You just rarely see people having a curse. I actually, my very first D&D character, my very, very first character that I ever made, Dice, I actually, surprisingly enough, wrote a curse into his story. He was actually like my very first D&D character was cursed from the get-go. And I don't mean cursed as in I wrote a character and then I wanted him to have a curse so in his adventure and he got one. I literally wrote it into his birth. Dice was cursed at birth. Like, he has been cursed his whole life. And I thought it was so interesting of an idea. Like, to literally, I wanted to, because I was really into this idea of creating my own challenges, right? Like, I'm going to have the dice are going to tell me what my stats are. That's going to be one challenge. I'm going to build out the character and level it up and play this game with puzzles and all of that other kind of stuff. That's all going to be challenging. But I'm like, I didn't want to just roll into this like a video game where I'm just going to have the best intended character. You know what I mean? And that's and literally that's stuck with me so long, all these years with playing D&D, both creating NPCs and creating my own characters, is I never just want to be the idealized version of whatever I'm creating. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be, the all benevolent paladin or the ever rage induced berserker or the ever arrogant fighter or the always looking for a quick buck rogue. Like, I don't want these things. I don't want to be the fireball everything wizard. Like, I've never enjoyed this idea of being the epitome of what I'm trying to make. I like the idea, and it doesn't necessarily mean I want to be an evil version, but I've always tried to add some aspect to my characters that isn't necessarily a obstacle to play them, but a challenge in the essence of what is a real person going through, right? Like, this is the idea of what we've talked about is playing the character. Exactly. So Dice, again, the reason why he was called Dice, right? Like, he had a real name. He had, it was always about, just he grew up, had a family. His parents were refugees, so they were on the run. Parents got, killed. He and his brother split up. There was like a falling out with he and his brother. His brother blamed him for his parents' death because parents got attacked. They watched it, and Dice, being the older brother, was like, "We have to go," because the dad is basically like, always protect the brother.
Yeah.
So this is all just the story I wrote before I ever even rolled the stats. I came to my DM and was like, "Here's like 2 pages of backstory. Let's roll." I was that new player.
I absolutely.
But yeah, the whole thing was like, we watched our watched our parents get attacked. I decided not to go back to help. I took us away. When we went back, we basically found them, tortured, all of that, fun stuff. Again, the traditional roguish, bad backstory. But the idea also was that my brother blamed me. He was like, it's your fault. We could have stopped him.
Right.
And we split ways. I then, my character then went, we split ways. He found me later down the road and we ended up fighting. Like, he came back for revenge. And we got to this fight and basically brought him to the brink of death. And I basically had my blade to his neck. Like, basically, the fight was over, but I let him live. And the reason for that is because of this curse, right? So I wrote this curse into my backstory. I wrote this in that I'm from this family who, we had this issue with like the god of luck or the god of gambling. And basically whatever happened is like the town that I was in, the whole place I'm from, everyone got like a soul curse. And basically, whenever faced with a major decision, a life-altering decision, whenever anything bigger than just,
what do you want to eat for lunch?
Yeah, if it's anything major, you would be compelled. Like, this was not, so you could not make a decision on your own. So a big decision came up in your life, and you would have a compulsion. That compulsion would be represented in physical form somehow. For Dice, it was a D12. An actual physical D12 die appeared in his hand. He could feel it. Whenever a major decision happened, he would get that compulsion and he could feel it. Just an incorporeal, only he could touch, only he could feel, but anybody could see. Right? So it's visible, but only he could touch it, only he could manipulate it, but he could feel it appear in his hand. His brother was a coin. But the reason why it was a 12-sided dice is because when the decision needed to be made, you would roll, flip, you would do whatever your manifestation was, and the manifestation would be one of 12 results, which is why mine was a D12. His was my brother's was a coin, but it would be one of 12 results. His coin would just randomly flip through 12 phases. The first 9 were the 9 alignments of D&D, of the original AD&D. So any from lawful good, lawful neutral, lawful evil, all neutral everything, and then evil everything. So the first 9 were each individual alignment, and then the last 3 were good, neutral, evil of player choice. And what happened is when this decision came up, when you had to make this decision, you would be compelled to do your ritual. Mine was rolling the dice, this was flipping the coin. Some people, some people's would be a book and they'd have to flip to a random page, right? The idea is whatever your ritual spell or
that
your
would
curse,
decide how you would act in that moment.
You would temporarily have an alignment change in that moment. So if you were a good character and your compulsion made you turn evil, that decision had to be made from an evil point of view. So, and again, in second edition, evil was more about selfishness, good was more about benevolence, and neutral was about maintaining balance. And then, the lawful, chaotic aspects were, do you believe in a structure of rules, or do you not think about consequences and just go based off what's in front of you, right? And it's just the varying degrees. So if you were a good character, but you were compelled to do this in an evil way, whatever decision you made would be now made from the perspective of that new alignment, and you'd keep that alignment through whatever action you were doing. So, if you wanted to get into a bar and it was like, someone's going to die in there and you're like, I need to get in here, and someone's preventing you. You're like, you roll your thing and you're a good guy. You don't want to do anything. You're normally pacifist and you roll evil. You'd turn evil. You'd basically bash your way through. But you wouldn't stop until you completed what you needed to do, which means
you would continue following that alignment until
you accomplished whatever that decision was. So until you either were beaten Or it could be if 5 more guys come out, you're still in that evil alignment. But until you either accomplish the goal or you're incapacitated, that alignment would stick. And then you'd immediately go back to your previous alignment once your decision, even if it was just a yes or no decision, whenever the decision was complete,
yes,
you would revert back to your normal alignment.
So, question on that front. Say, hypothetically, you're in the situation where you have the opportunity to choose whether to kill one of 2 people, something like that, right? You make your roll. Now you have been assigned whatever alignment you've been assigned for this moment in time. Can you, if you can articulate how you would make that decision from that alignment? Say I was a good alignment, and traditionally I would have shot this person, right? But then I got changed to an evil alignment. If I could find a way to, within that alignment, justify killing that same person.
So that really comes down to kind of an honor system. Like, you know me.
Yeah,
if there's a justification, yes. However, if you're just, if I catch you just trying to justify it because you just don't like the decision.
You don't want to have to.
No, that's not how the curse works. The fact is and again, I don't make it, again, there's 9 alignments. I'm not trying to be pedantic of what every single one would do. I'm not telling you what the decision was. But if you are a lawful good, meaning that you believe in the laws of the land, you believe in following the rules, and you believe in doing what's right for others. If you roll evil and you're just being like, oh, well, it's technically evil because it's selfish, because if I help them, then our friendship grows. And by a growing friendship, even though I don't care about them, they have more trust in me. And if they have more trust in me, they'll do things for me. So, it's really benefiting me to,
I do get that.
You're basically saying you don't want to do the bad deed. But if you're saying that I don't want to necessarily be violent, but I'm normally nice. So what if I go up to the guy, I don't normally do this, but because it's not my standard, what if I intimidate him instead? I don't want to fight him, but what if I go out of the way to intimidate his family? I assume he has a kid. I'm just looking at him. Does he insight check? Does he have a kid? Little things. And you could be again, I'm okay with you working your way out of the worst decision that you don't want to make. I'm not okay with you getting out of the fact that
avoiding participating in the consequence itself.
And again, this wasn't my realm. This wasn't in my realm. This was in my DM's realm. So this was just, remember, he rolled with this.
But
he worked with it. But this was my idea.
So
again, it was mainly just because I was new. I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do. So this was also part and partial to give me just randomness. It was it was my cop out to say, if I'm bored running my character with this alignment, or if I come into a decision that I just don't want to make, I felt better letting the dice make it. So you were saying, I was the opposite. Instead of being I rolled what I didn't, I rolled something and I didn't want that outcome. Instead of trying to talk my way out of it, I was the guy who goes, what we talked about with the trolley problem. I'm I don't want to make the decision. Let the dice. I'd rather absolve myself of making the decision. That's the player I'm at, right? If the dice made me do what I didn't want to do, I'm okay because I didn't have a control. I was compelled. It's my curse. I didn't have that. So that was my point, right? That was what I did. Fabulous. So it's kind of funny that, I was the opposite. So anyway, long story short, it's too late for long story short. But anyway, so me and my brother, we split after the parents thing. He came back. We fought. We were in a fight to the death. When he fought me, I didn't want to fight him, but he was like, no, this is happening. It's I'm going to kill you. Of course, that required me to roll my dice to decide how am I going to run? Am I going to try and talk it out? And that resulted in me basically going I think it was I either went neutral evil or lawful evil. Or no, he was already lawful evil. I think I ended up going chaotic evil or something. Basically, it was just an all-out brawl. It was okay, fine, you're doing this. Fuck it, let's go. So we just had a bloody out, all-out brawl. I ended up winning, got down to the point to where I could kill him. And right before I could, because again, my original dice roll was for the
see, that's my question.
So
would you have to roll again?
I did, because again, the original intent was because I looked at it from the point of view of decisions, right? The first decision was, how am I going to respond to he is about to attack me? How am I going to deal with this?
Yeah.
Once the fight was over, that was dealt with. But now it was a new decision of, I have him here to kill. Do I kill him? That suddenly triggered, even though I went technically instantly back into my old alignment, I instantly was triggered a new decision. So I sat there, like, fight was over, walked up to him, did that, kind of was coming out of it, and then just pulled it out and just showed it to him and just smiled and just dropped it. And it was a good alignment. Had to let him go. So I was like, I'll let you go. So I walked away. Thought he was, basically left him for dead, though. Now, I didn't let him live. I left him for dead. As far as my character knew, he was dead, but I specifically left him in there. I didn't watch him die. I knew what my DM was going to do with it, but that was the fun part, right? I knew specifically how my DM, like, he had explained how things work, like, story-wise. So I left that in there for him. I was like, he was bleeding out. And I walked off. I made it clear he had no reason.
Don't do as a bad guy.
Exactly. So I did it.
No, you kill him.
Lo and behold, my brother was alive, and he has a vendetta against me, by the way. So that was a whole thing. But yeah, so again, that was like a curse that I had written in to where whenever decisions had to be made, I would do that. Now, the cool part was, though, is I also wrote in that this was a requirement. It was a compulsion. But because, the whole town and everything have had it for, however long, through generations, right? It wasn't just like a brand new curse. It was like a family thing, right? So it's like grandparents had this shit. It's become more attuned to us. So you don't have to, you have to use it when you're compulsed, like when you have that compulsion. But you don't have to wait for the compulsion. People learned you can choose to summon it at any time. You have to follow it. So they've learned basically over the generations, we learned you can summon your whatever you want to call it and use it. Once you summon it, you have to use it. So it's like you can initiate it and then you have to follow through. On any decision you want, you can choose.
Does it have to, like, say if I want to do it preemptively, like, can I do it before the decision needs to be made, and then it will trigger once the decision?
No, it's always like at the time of deciding. Okay. So but it is, sometimes it's a choice. So again, I wrote that in to like cop out, which it's funny because my character used it at one point where it wasn't a big decision. It was just a decision he didn't want to make. So he tried to slickly like use that to get out of it, and the person called him out on it. They were like, okay, fuck you then. Like they because they knew about it. So like when they saw me like try to drop the dice, because again, it's incorporeal, no one can mess with it, but it is visible. And so basically whenever I roll my dice, it looks like a dice that's rolling, and whenever it lands, the top will glow a little bit and show the number, and then I'll shift. So everyone can see that. So it's like I tried to be slick when we were talking and just like roll it on the ground, and they saw it happen, and they're like, so you just don't want to answer? Like basically we like realized I was trying to get out of the responsibility of it. But that was cool because I didn't use it that often, right? It was just like something I wanted to keep in the background. But what was cool is like my DM ended up using that, and he wrote it in like when I finally found my brother again. My brother like compulsively used it. Like anytime he dealt with people, like he just always had it out. So he was just known for having the coin out all the time. So whenever he dealt with someone, he'd be like, "Hey, how's it going, guys? Oh, you're looking for directions? Bing, chink.
Looks like I'm gonna kill you now."
Yeah, exactly. He just lived his life truly like whereas I basically like truly like hid behind like it as a crutch. He just fully went in with it and was like, this is my life. So
this is who I am.
And it was kind of funny too. I loved that my DM did this. So I named myself Dice because after my brother and I split and after I left him for dead, found my way to a town, ran into, some people. They helped me live on the streets. So I learned to be a thief, because I was actually, my very first character was a fighter rogue, or I can't remember if it was a rogue fighter or fighter rogue, but I always wrote it in on like my character build that I was a fighter by nature, thief by trade, because it wasn't an innate class that I took. It was based on survival. I was taught how to basically do the roguelike stuff,
do the live that life,
but it was out of necessity, never out of desire. So I turned that into, I'm primarily a fighter, have rogue abilities because I learned them, but then turn that into, I wanted to go after like the rogue profession. I wanted to be known for what I could do. I didn't want to pick people. I didn't want to just break into places. I wanted to be the guy that you went to if you needed something to be done. So I could get into a place, but then handle myself in a fight kind of deal. So that was the character build I was going for. And it was kind of just really interesting because after I had fallen in with those people, right? they taught me the lesson of like, don't ever let people know your real name. Like, you need one.
Yes.
And because at early stages, before I grew out of using the die, the compulsive die, I would use it a lot just because, again, unfamiliar places, I was just like, because again, the compulsion almost helped. It was almost like taking a shot of alcohol because I was compulsed to use a new alignment, or sometimes I was compulsed in my own alignment, but without having to worry about the decisions I was making because the curse kind of like took the wheel. I didn't have to worry. So like new situations, someone's like, go, if I was nervous to pickpocket, I just roll the die. And especially if it was like an evil one, I'd be like, fuck this guy. I'll kill him if he sees me, right? Like, it was a mindset change. It was easier for me to accept this new life. It was easier for me to do things. It was kind of like drinking to get courage, right?
Yes.
The idea of liquid courage. The die was my crutch. I didn't live off of it, but I used it when my character wasn't confident enough. Whereas my in-game brother just went the full addiction, just went full into this is my life. Whereas I used it truly as a crutch. When I felt I couldn't do what needed to be done, I backed into the die. But because of that, they always saw me rolling it and always saw me act differently. So where did my name come from? They needed a nickname for me, so I was known as Dice. I got my name simply because of my curse. What I found really interesting is they gave me, I had it written in that they gave, like, that first crew gave me that name. And then that's just how I always called my character after that. What I loved about it is my DM took that, because it was like, I think a year or two later, like in and out of game, that I met my brother finally. Like, he finally let me know that my brother was still alive. But I found it awesome because he did something really cool. Because whereas I got the name Dice for my curse, because he used to, he wrote it in, like, my DM decided that like his was going to be a coin. I never decided that. I just said that everyone had the curse. He wrote that whole aspect in that it was a coin. So he gave my brother the name Flip. I thought that was fucking dope.
That's sick.
I was like, yeah, I see what you did there. I'm like, that was cool. Because again, it was one of those things where it's like, it's small, it made perfect sense, and it may sound like not very creative, but for me, it was like, you really took what I had built and made it like you took it into your own realm. You absolved it and made this story real, but then you made it connection. Like, you made it connect. You made it feel my creation, right? And that was really cool. Like, that was the thing that I really enjoyed about like what my DM did, is he really taught me a lot more about how to take, not just like respond to what players say, not just use them to just like trigger things, but to really figure out like what is it that you're putting into the world and into the story, and how is that supposed to respond, right?
Which honestly is one of the biggest things that I feel like addresses one of my biggest concerns about interacting with curses in the first place, which is the actual player enjoying it, right?
Exactly.
If you spend enough time to, like, when you're crafting this, when you're doing this, especially if it's like a big deal, like, we're talking about curses that can be potentially debilitating or potentially like game changing. Like, one of the biggest things is you get a bunch of warnings ahead of time. You're literally just screwing yourself. Like, if you really want to go down this road, you can go down this road, but you're going to hurt yourself. Or it's something that is a part of your story, and it's like yours. I mean, yours was to a certain extent debilitating. Like, it wasn't really.
It could be, because if I, it actually made making decisions sometimes harder, because if I ended up going the full pacifist route, I had to swallow my pride.
Imagine if
I'd
Dice
have to
got put in front of Queen Mab like Dovs did, and had to get asked if you want to make a deal, and he had to roll to see how he was going to respond to her, and he chose some like. That's my point, but that's my thing is like. And so I do get that.
Or again, like imagine having a very prideful character and then having to swallow that pride, because the dice said you have to act this way, right? Like, there's so many things where, and again, it's so funny now, because now that I'm talking about this again, right? Like, this was, oh my God, this was. It's over 10 years now. I mean, I don't even know at that point. Like, anything over 10 years, it's like it's over 10 years. But I mean, I created dice well over 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And what's so funny is thinking about, I mean, I remember this was when we were deployed. I was sitting in my barracks on a fucking notepad writing this whole backstory up, thinking about all of this stuff, right? And I knew nothing about D&D at this point. I we've talked about like my history with it. I had known about it, but I knew nothing traditionally. My DM just was like, hey, create a character. We talked about some like basics, but we were going to get into the specifics over time. He was going to just like,
learn as you go type deal.
kind of thing. And now that I'm remembering, like, having written this in, it's just amazing seeing the seeds that were planted when I very first began, before I became the DM that I am, right? Before High Point, before Zenith, before me being a DM and creating all of this, I'm thinking back on it and re-discussing this curse. It sounds like exactly what we were talking about just a couple episodes ago. It sounds like a roleplay curse.
Yeah.
Instead of an
Very
item curse or a cursed item or
Very
a
much
spell
so.
or a curse that's debilitating based off of like in-game stats or whatever. I literally created a roleplay curse. It's a curse purely based off of roleplay. It doesn't do anything to me other than force me to act differently on really tough decisions. That's all it does, is I just act different. And that can be debilitating in the sense that I can act out of character. I can do things we wouldn't normally have done. I could be more reckless, or I could be more, cautious. There's a lot of different ways I could go about it, right?
Incorrect roll of dice get you banned from a kingdom forever.
So it's just funny. I think about that. I'm like, man, literally day one of creating a character. And now, over 10 years later, we were literally talking about roleplay class features. And I'm like, this is basically, that was the seed. I literally planted that seed all of those years ago.
It goes to show you, like, what you actually find of value in the game. And, like, even outside of the game, this is before you even knew what the game was really about.
Right?
You were still...
It's just my I guess it's my creativity or my level of the world I've always thought of D&D being, right? This is the...
Yes.
This, when you say I'm cursed, this is what I think of, right? And what's really going to be funny is I'm glad we went over this. I wasn't planning on doing this big intro. But I'm glad we went over this simply because when we go over the history of how curses evolved, I find it, again, very hilarious that had my DM wrote this up, it would have made perfect sense based on the history of how curses evolved through the editions. But because I wrote it without knowing any of this, it's so hilarious because it falls right into the history of how these things evolved. It's before second edition, I literally did exactly what second edition meant for curses, and I didn't even know what I was doing.
Right.
Like, it's just one of those things where, again, more of the reason why I like second edition.
And I think that's nice because it just shows that the way that these editions put a lot of this stuff together, it just makes sense, right? It makes so much sense that before you even knowing what they had intended, very much so. Yeah. And so I think that it's like, you talk about, like, great minds think alike. Like, you're already thinking like these game creators before these game creators created games.
Before I knew what they were doing.
Exactly.
Right?
You know what I'm saying?
And it's so funny. It's like so many people will be like, oh, I have this great idea, and then they'll find out someone else created it, and then they'll feel bad about that. I'm like, you have to remember, though, it's not like you heard about it and then try to punt off at your own. You still thought about it all on your own.
Completely
You still were just as smart as that person, just because you weren't alive before them. You may not have been the first, but don't discredit the fact that you still came up to that conclusion yourself. I feel too many people do this. So many people take away from their own value when they don't realize, like, we put too much value in being the first, when you realize that being the first just isn't probably even being the first. Like, how many times do you find out that some famous person that you've known since, like grade school, that they're known for the creation or the invention of something, and then you find out nowadays, you're like, oh, there was like 3 people before them. They're the ones who were known for it.
You see something come out and you're like, I thought of that like a year ago.
Yep.
Like, I can't tell you how many times, like, I've heard people say that. I've said that. Oh my God, it was such but they're the ones who took action on it. They're the ones who did the thing with it. And
that's the thing, is like, well, and then there's also the thing of, even if you did do it at the time, were you in the right place, the right time? Do you have the right resources? But again, too many people they throw away. You might not care for the idea if you're like, oh, someone else already did it, I don't have to continue thinking about this. That's fine. You can throw away the work that's ahead of you for finishing it if you realize that it's already done. But too many people in throwing out the future work, they throw out the value that came with coming to that conclusion.
Exactly.
Because they just assume, well, I'm not that smart. And it's like, well, you are, because you didn't need someone else to tell you it. You saw a problem, you found a solution, you created it. Just because someone else got to it beforehand, who cares?
It does not take away from any of the benefit that you brought to the table.
Yeah, it doesn't, and it doesn't change the fact that they weren't the only one. They're not, they're not special. They're not better than you. You also came up with it and could have been there had you been there at the right time and place, right? Now, I certainly have had plenty of ideas that I've talked to people with, and within 2 years, we're getting Instagram ads for it, and it's just like the newest fad, and I'm like, wow, that's messed up. I literally, and it's so funny, like you talk about it and you're like, I literally described that. Like I could pull up a text message and be like, that description is exactly what we're looking at. And I'm so mad because like
I'm lightweight curious if all the listening that they do when they show you those targeted ads,
right? And there's just like an AI. There's just like an AI that just sits there and populates it to people, and they're like, "Oh,
they're also stealing your
idea."
ideas." I'm like, you sons of bitches.
I wouldn't be surprised, man.
Rude.
But yeah, so it's fascinating how appealing things can be, and how approachable or like intuitive things can be, based on, again, what you expect it to be at the time. And that's where I think, again, like going back to what you were saying about the editions, I really think each edition tried to be as approachable as it needed to be for the era it came out in. And that's, I think, also indicative, not so much of there's obviously players who have played a lot of editions have their preferences, and so they're, second edition players like me, or fifth edition players. But for the most part, players are really generational, right? It's for the most part, like, if you started with fifth, even if you try the others, you're probably going to stick with fifth. Most people stick with the most modern and most common, because it's going to get updates. It's going to have all of the freshest available sources,
pretty
information.
Flowers, yeah.
But again, people who don't like change or have been playing in an edition for a long time still will just prefer that one. I mean, it's kind of what happened to me, just because a second edition was the first one I played in, and it really just it's to me a lot more welcoming in the creative sense, and less about the here's the hardbound rules that you need to follow, right? And that's just again, just my personal preference, but it is fascinating that, it's kind of more of, I think, more of a generational thing than it is an edition thing.
I feel that. I very much feel that.
But that's why I also like to approach it, that every edition's mixable. I don't really look at it honestly, as different games.
So it sounds crazy. It sounds weird, but that's honestly what I want to build. I want to build like, not first edition. Let's say I want to build Kage's edition, right? Like, just eventually, because there's different like rule sets that people have. Like, I have a lot of fifth edition mechanics, but I also like spell points rather than spell slots, right?
Yeah.
I just take every spell slot that you have. If you have a third level spell slot, that's 3 spell points, right? Mm-hmm. And you just get I literally have a bag of just dots that you use from like random other like board games, and I give them to my players. And whenever they want to cast a spell, whatever level spell that is, you just give me some spells.
Where did you get spells, like spell points from?
Where did I get that concept?
Yeah,
I just did that.
Oh, because it's funny, because second edition is basically like that.
Really?
So the way second edition works is like, if you can cast a second level spell, you can cast 1 second level spell or 2 first level spells. If you have a third, it's a 3, a 2, and a 1, or 3 1s. It feels more
right. Flexible. It's like, it feels like you have this pool.
And I look at my justification isn't so much about points, it's about power. And it's about mental capacity, right? Like, each level of spell is supposed to be in second edition because you memorize them, right? It's about mental capacity. Your ability to cast a more powerful spell is your body's ability to manage that magic and funnel it, but it's also your ability to memorize such a complex magic, right? So I don't look at it as you've leveled up, you suddenly can cast a bigger spell. I look at it as this entire time you've been studying more complex magic. You're just finally now able to memorize it and cast it reliably. So you've been trying this whole time and trying and failing in the background. We just don't usually role play that stuff. Yes. But I always look at it as in between level ups. Level ups aren't something that just happen. Level ups are consistent work in the background. When you guys are at camp and you guys say, we're going to go to sleep for the night, there's going to be an hour where you all are just chilling, right? Yep. Some of you are going to be sparring. Some of you are going to just be target practicing. Some of you are going to be sharpening your weapons. Some of you are going to be cooking. You all are going to be doing those things that when you level up and say, I'm taking this proficiency, that's what you were doing when you guys were camping. Yep. That's what you were doing. When we did that 3 days where you guys hung out in town, you took a cooking class. You went over to the blacksmith and asked if you could work there for a bit so you could get some spare part. Like, I don't usually role play them, but those are the things that I always imagine are happening that explain why you level up and fighters can suddenly have a new attack. It's because you and your party have been sparring on your off time and you've just finally learned that twist of the blade to go bow, and I finally got you a second time.
It makes a lot more sense because a lot of what you and I have talked about in the past is how if you set up certain precedents, like Davd and his spinning of his ring, or say if I and one of my teammates, I know that I have the ability to have this cantrip called shape water, right? And it has the ability to like freeze something, right? And so there's another magic user in the group. Like, say I want to practice with them. They're going to do some water bending where they bring a bunch of water over here, and at the same time, I freeze it. Right?
Yeah,
and then somebody else can do something where they like shoot it on. So we like create this little move combo, but it takes time for us to practice.
Exactly.
It takes,
and then, but you can eventually create a new maneuver.
Yes.
Well, we talked about that before. Creating
Very
maneuvers,
much so.
right? Allowing basically party feats. Maybe that's what we should call it. Party feats instead of maneuvers.
That's kind of cool.
Because I do like this idea of more than a feat that has the condition of you and another party member are X feet within X feet of each other, or whatever the condition needs to be met. Line of sight if it's a magic thing, or earshot if you have to be a verbal like now, right? And then you like, so it's like you're within one of those conditions, and you both have an initiative that's back to back. Like you're going first, they're going next, or they go. Basically you have initiative back to back, and you satisfy whatever condition. You guys can be like, hey, we want to pull off this feat, and it's like, well, are you next to each other? Yes. Or, or do you follow that? Are you guys initiative? Like, can you basically act back to back? Yeah, you guys can do it, right? Like, those are cool ass conditions that I think
like
that the idea of a party feat, and I say party feat, not necessarily one that
yes,
has the
very
whole
much
party.
so. But like, it could be,
Or
just
a
you
group
and
feat.
another party.
It's called a group feat or something
Yeah.
like that. But yeah, the idea that, if you have two people that, like if you have, you could say, and these could be simple ones, right? They could either be customized ones that are specific to your characters, or you could say, like, you could have loose-based ones. Like, hey, if you have anybody in the party that is 2 sizes smaller than any other person in the party, so whatever tiny or whatever, but as long as one person is 2 sizes smaller than another, you can use them to double your jump speed or your jump distance. Like, you just basically like run up and get on their back, and then like maybe they stand up or they throw you.
Yeah.
But the idea is that could be a group feat, is as long as you are within 3
cool.
feet behind them and can get a running start, you can run up behind them and use them to jump twice the normal distance that you would normally be able to. Like, that's a small group feat. Everybody could accept that. That could just be a DM specific rule where you're like, that's my rule. If you are 2 sizes different. And again, that could work because guess what? That could work with things like the enlarged spell.
You see, I like that a lot because I was thinking, because we're talking about like how you go about doing these things and how you go about earning these things. Most feats you earn like on your like 4th level up or something like that. I kind of like the idea if, say, 2 people want to specifically learn such and such feat. All they really have to do is track long rests together. Imagine if they just had a certain number of long rests together, and the only way they could get it is if they personally track it, because anytime they forget, they forgot to practice.
So what I've done in the past, in terms of when people want to create this, right, I've done 2 different things, and you've experienced this with Davd. One is either prove to me that it's worth it by, and this is something that I kind of got from my DM because he did something similar, where it's basically, if you do it enough to show me that you have consistency with it and that it's going to be something that your character, like, I don't need you to do it 100% of the time forever. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't have to tell me every gaming session I'm spinning the thing. But you had to tell me for long enough that we both realized, okay, it's just happening in the background now. You don't got to keep telling me every session. But you did have to tell me for several sessions, by the way, I'm still doing this. By the way, I'm still doing this. And you would just randomly, by the way.
And I still do sometimes, just in case.
But to me, it's like, okay, we've both now established this is second nature. I just don't like the idea of character. Like, and my biggest thing is, this is how I balance giving my players something that I don't want them to abuse, right? This would have been very abusable, right? It's hugely abusable. So from day one, you basically like learned that like really quick. You were like, I got an idea.
I want to do.
But if you just straight out said from day one, I'm going to do this and just let it charge forever, and I just said, cool, done. That's just OP as shit, right? Yeah. And I just handed it to you. I just fucking gave it to you. But in my opinion, it's like, okay, that's cool. Technically, I'm not going to tell you the rules don't allow that because you came up with a really good idea with the rules I gave you. I'm gonna reward that. but I also don't want to just make it like, oh, well, I just came up with the idea, so I just get it.
Yes.
So it's like, if you really want that, kind of like you said, you got to tell me. So you can't just tell me one session. If 3, 4, 5 sessions go by and you've never mentioned the ring, you're like, I want to use the ring, and be like, it kind of has some power. You did it that one time. But I wanted to keep doing it. And I'm like, but have you been? Well, I thought I was, like, but have you been? Like,
yeah,
it's that whole thing of once it's been a couple sessions, once it's been a couple in-game weeks, right? And it's like your character has proven that this is just idle movement. Like your character, we've just known whenever dog has idle motion or he's just chilling. That's just a tick. It's a nervous thing that no one will notice, but he's always just like swinging that little chain. That's beautiful, and you did it enough to earn it, right? And I think that those are one good level, and that's kind of what I took from my DM. But what I also do, the long rest thing is kind of, I get what you're saying, but I also think it's almost like, well, players can just kind of abuse long rests most of the time in 5th edition, like they just take them.
Yes.
And it's kind of like, unless you have a certain gameplay, isn't it just basically saying wouldn't it just be better to say wait till your next level up and I'll give it to you at your next level up together? Because it's going to be like obvious that they're going to always be long resting together. They're a party, right? So those are just my hesitations.
Yes.
But here's how, so other than making it consistent, like you guys always say, we're practicing that maneuver, we're practicing that maneuver, we're practicing that maneuver. Do we have it now? The other thing I like to do is consecutive wins. So kind of like, kind of not really like death saving throws because you don't have to be consecutive about it. But if you want to do something, I'll be like, okay, if you can successfully do it 3 times in a row, you'll have it. So anytime you want to try it, you have to roll for it. And at any point in the future, you can get 3 times in a row, I'll let you have it. That's common for me that I'll do that.
Okay.
So if you want to do an action, if you're like, hey man, I have a staff. I want to do a move where I pivot the staff in the ground and I do that flip over the enemy and I'm behind him. It's like, okay, it's going to be an athletics check. You're like, I just want to be able to do that though. It's like, okay, you can do it anytime you want to try it, but until you do it 3 times in a row successfully without any fails.
Is that 3 times in a row in one combat?
No, just in general. Just 3 successful attempts over any period.
Without a failure.
And it's just to represent the fact that you practice. Like, you don't have to roll it when you practice. Now, granted, if you say, I want to practice right here, right now, and you do 3 rolls, I'm not just going to let you roll 50 billion times until you get 3 in a row.
Yeah.
There will be conditions. You can only practice for so long. But I like that condition because if you guys are like, hey, we want to do this thing, I would love to give it to you just to be able to do it. Like that whole jump off the back and get twice your distance. But I don't want, if I feel like, that's a little bit just of a, here you go.
Yeah.
I'll be like, okay, as long as you can do what you say, here's the roll I'll assign to it. And depending on how difficult I think it is, usually it's 3 minimum. But sometimes it'll be like, you have to do it 5 times. You have to be able to, like, if it's like a brand new spell, someone wants to do like a custom spell, you're going to have to be able to successfully cast that spell 5 times before you can memorize, like just before you can use it.
Get the feel of it.
And those are that's just the 2 limitations that I like, because depending on the severity of it, if it's like mundane, like, you spinning the thing, that's more of a mundane action that should be just role played until it's understood that your character just does that. Right. Like if you want to change your accent, if you want your character to be known for an accent, you have to tell me that he's in that accent right now, and we'll maybe make some rolls,
some charisma checks, see how good you're. Yeah.
Until eventually it's just so ingrained that when you say I switch to that accent, I don't make you make a roll because no one questions it. You've just practiced it so well that So that one would be maybe a time frame thing, right? Because that's not really a do it 3 times successfully. That's a long term. So I'll make different reasons for whether or not it should be you need to tell me until I'm okay with you having this, or you just need to make rolls and successfully show me that you've practiced to the point to where you want to be able to do that. And the reason why I also have the 2 separate, to like separate like the severity, is that second one really allows for people to get really creative. Like, let's say you're a rogue and you can throw daggers. Let's say you're like, I want to be able to disarm someone with a dagger throw. I want it to be a disarming move. I want to be able to hit a ring finger. I want to be able to hit the hilt. I want to be able to like you could, you just want to be able to disarm, right? You could either say, it's like, and how are you going to practice that? It's like, well, whenever we're in a bar, I'll go stab a dagger into the dartboard, and then I'm just going to throw my other dagger until I hit the handle until it dislodges. That's just how I practice. Like that could be a practice. Like, okay, you get 5 tries tonight. You know what I mean? Like those are ways that I would let them work on. How are you going to earn it? How are you going to learn it?
I feel that.
But those are the things where it's like, that's a whole new feat now. You could be like, you just earned a feat that doesn't exist anywhere else. But you, player, character, learn something in the real world just like anyone would, right? I wanted to learn techniques, so I taught myself how to do it. Like like the TikToks and Insta Reels of the people doing the trick shots. And they just show how like 3 hours, 5 hours, 900 attempts, 1 attempt. Like those are always so cool. But that's what I'm talking about, right? Like you see the end video of them doing like the 3 darts in a row and they all hit each other. You see that video and you're like, that's the feat that I want to do. But you didn't see the 9 hours and 900 attempts.
Where your 9 hours and 900 attempts.
How do you represent that? You either have to get them to role play it and say, I'm doing that thing. Until you realize, okay, you've told me enough, you earned it. Like, I get it, your character really wants that. Or you have to roll for it. You have to show me that your character practiced this. And instead of how else do you do that other than, like, and you could do this by time frame too. You could be like, if you don't want them, if you don't play that often, you know, like we play a lot, so that was easier for you to tell me every gaming session. But if, let's say you don't play that often, then you could say, okay, you want this? We're going to say your character's working on it. And depending on the severity, you can assign... You'll earn this at the next level up, or it's going to take you quite a while to learn this. You're at level 5, you'll have to wait till level 7. Just assign an arbitrary number. Right. You don't have to ever tell me that you're doing this, but we get it. You're practicing it. I'm going to wait till this level to give it to you. Because that's how long.
That honestly makes...
That's one way to do it. Just constantly having them remind you is one way to do it. Having them do rolls and then consistent wins. Those are 3 ways I would suggest doing it. And kind of like what you were saying, instead of doing how many long rests together, that one would be easier as on your guys' next level up, or give them when you guys,
right.
Or if you're traveling, like if you're like in the middle of a campaign, be like, you know what? I like this idea. By the time you guys reach here, you'll have learned it. So anything that happens between there and that, because maybe you've planned these out, right? You're a DM, you've planned out the encounters and you're like, I don't really want to have you have this now. I'm going to make you wait till here because the encounters wouldn't really work if you have a new ability, but I want to give it to you guys, right? So you could do that. You could have some sort of arbitrary time. I don't want to say arbitrary because it's not arbitrary to you, but give them some sort of time frame that acknowledges that they're working on it. So.
Okay. No, I'm here for that.
Yeah. So those are, I don't really remember how we got on that
particular side tangent. We were talking about a lot of different things.
Yeah. But going back to removing curses, because this is, we've been just talking, just chatting. It's a Friday. It's fine.
That's what we do.
It happens. But yeah, going back to removing curses, because I think we got on this topic about the more role play aspect of things and what you can do and what you can accomplish through role playing versus having like a static, like this is what you need to do, this is what you need to roll, things like that. Excuse me. So let's get into the history, because I know that this is kind of where you were really interested in is, what are curses? What was the history of having them, removing them, and really what can we do with them? Like what can we do with curses? I gave you guys the example of my very first interaction with the curse, which was one I gave myself. It was an ingrained curse. It was kind of a divine level curse. It stuck to the soul. It was bound to the soul. It was bound to generations of families and a whole town. It wasn't bound by blood. It was bound to a town. So anybody born there in that town was affected by it, right?
Do you consider lycanthropy a curse or a disease?
Say that again?
Lycanthropy.
So that's...
If we're talking about qualifications of what curses are.
That's an amazing question. And to me, that really comes down not even to the DM's choice of how magic works. That comes down to lore. That answer is 100% lore in terms of how does the DM look at it? Like that is 100% setting based.
Okay.
Because they work both ways. Having it be a disease or a genetic mutation, basically based on blood, totally works. Based on magic, totally works. Based on a race, totally works. Like no matter what prism you put it in, it all works out the same way, right?
Yeah.
So that isn't really a question, unless you're asking what High Point looks at it as. in terms of how you should approach that, I feel it's whatever you're comfortable with in what makes more consistency with the rest of your realm, right?
Okay.
'Cause
So
same thing with
in that sense, then as we move forward, if it does work like a curse in your realm, then whatever types of potential solutions for removing curses could potentially cure you of
correct,
such
yes.
a thing.
So again, lycanthropy, vampirism, all of these things can be explained in multiple different ways. It could be a whole race of creature. It could be a disease that they can inflict you with. It could be magic. It could be psychic. It could be a mental thing. Like it could be divine. There's so many. It could just be a mutation. It could be physical. Like there's a lot of different representations of it, and how you go about correcting it or dealing with it is again a manifestation, right? Because if it's magic, maybe that's the whole thing about like vampires. Like maybe stakes in the heart work because it's a blood disease and you just stop the blood from flowing. But maybe sunlight doesn't work because it's a blood disease and all they do is get a sunburn, but they don't burn up. But if it's magical or divine, maybe that's why the sun works and stakes don't, because they're undead. If you do the undead thing, what does a stake in the heart do? Nothing. But the sun works because they're creatures of the night. Like so many different ways to go about doing that. So I don't think there's any right or wrong way to go about whether you call something a disease or a curse. I think it's just, again, always about the consistency of the rules and how does it play into the rest of your realm.
Right.
And I'll also add this just for some fun context. Just like in the history of the real world, you don't necessarily have to distinguish the two, because curses and diseases have not always been two distinctly different things, even in our history. So what one person calls a curse, another could call a disease. So imagine in your realm, you have this curse. It works as a curse. As far as you know, mechanically, it's a curse. But imagine you have a people who figured out how to cure the curse, but they don't understand magic. Or they do, but they don't understand its magic, right? So they think it's a disease. They can cure this disease, but it's actually a magical. You know what I mean? Like the idea of it being a disease or a curse can also just be a misunderstanding or a perception. Maybe you have a race
right.
that is so technologically, like whether or not it is actual magic or technology, but you can have it to where one race looks at it as magic and another race looks at it as trivial.
That's a very fair point.
So that you have a good question of what is it? Is it a disease or a curse? It doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. It just depends on what does your lore state about how people interact with things.
Okay, would you say that though it can be viewed as both, in actuality it is one or the other? So what I mean by that is, say this people, they think that it is a sickness that they're curing, when in actuality what is curing it is a ritual that must be done to cleanse them. But they look at it as medicinal medicine because they're doing whatever to this person.
What if the ritual is just, bathing in a certain water and they just think it's washing up, right?
Sure.
Or it could be that you're being infected by, the tiniest of fairies. Like you just have a race of microscopic fairies that infect bodies. They just like to hang out on you, but they cause this disease. And while it's magical in nature, because it's like an aura of effect, the more you have on you, the worse the disease is, because it's like an AoE, but they're tiny. So it needs a lot of them for the AoE to build up. So there's other people, they don't understand magic, but they understand how to wash it off. They have a vaccine. They have a way to get rid of the fairy or the magical pollen, right?
Exactly.
So again, mechanically, does it matter? Does it actually matter from a player and DM point of view if it's magic or a disease? Or plot-wise, in-game, the story is someone looks at it as, we just need to clean you. We give you this little injection, and you're cured.
And
another person goes, no,
I think that'll come down to what we end up talking about, because
it will.
If we're talking about how are we as players going to go about, imagine somebody, we're talking about it like it's a curse, but it's just a disease.
Exactly.
And so one of the players goes, all right, I'm going to cast remove curse on you. Boom. Nothing freaking happens.
But that's the beauty of it, right? That's the beauty of running that.
To answer the question, does it matter? Yes, it very much does matter.
Well, okay, what I meant by does it matter is, in the end, if the consistency is, regardless of what, like in the sense of the fairies being bacteria or not, yes, it would matter if you're being pedantic about is medicine or is a spell going to remove it. Yes, it matters. What I was going for is, even if in the lore one says it's magic, one says it's not, if in the end your solution has to be the same thing. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Their
There's only
potion,
one. Yes.
Or, they call it a vaccine, they call it a potion. In the end, if your consistency says that is what removes it, that it doesn't matter if mechanically it actually is magic or mechanically it is a disease, because in the story that's not important. The important part is they think one thing, they think the other, but this is the solution. If the difference is the players are provided with solution A or solution B and it is an herb or a spell, then yes, it absolutely matters mechanically which you have chosen. Is it a curse or a disease? But what I was going for mainly is, if you have doesn't matter what you're told, if this is the solution, this is the fun part. This is the story, but this is the goal, right? This is the plot, this is the story. And we've talked about that before, the plot, the story, the narrative.
And I think there's definitely a place to, we'll say, you could run a story where it doesn't really matter. They just need to know this is what you got to do.
Exactly.
But you could also run a story where
it absolutely matters.
The whole point is, what is it, and you need to be the ones to figure out what to do.
You have a point at which you only have so long to figure it out, because there's going to be a point which you have to go in on a fork, where it's like, look, you guys have until here or this point to make a decision, because once this point happens, you will have just enough time to make it to point A and get the vaccine, or point B and get the spell. So you have until this time and this point in time to figure out which one you're afflicted with, because if you don't make a decision or by this time, you will have to choose which route you're going to go get your relief from, because if you go choose the wrong one, you won't have enough time to do the other, right? And in that particular case, it truly does matter. But I think that's what we were just kind of getting at, is depending upon how your lore is, it all matters on your consistency, right?
Yes.
Is it magic? It is a disease. I guess also what I was trying to say is, it only matters if you, the DM, look at them as different. If you think a disease and a curse are the same, it's just people call them in the realm differently. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter. They're the same because you said they're the same. But yes, if you have diseases and you have magical curses, then you have to distinguish.
Right.
But no, this is all actually building up good, because looking at the history, basically everything we're talking about, it falls right in line to what they wanted from curses. I'm going to pop out to use the restroom real quick. I'll leave them with you, and then we will get right into the actual history of this.
Yeah. So just to be very clear, I love the idea of what curses bring to the table, but I think so often people try to use them as punishment. It's like when a DM sees somebody who's doing something they don't want them to do. I'm going to give you this cursed item. I'm going to get you in trouble. I'm going to try and keep you in line. And I think it's a poor form of punishment, if I'm being honest. I think that it really discourages your players from interacting with the world, because they're not getting punished for their bad choice. They're getting punished for whatever exploration that they did. Oh, you touched something you weren't supposed to. You went somewhere you weren't supposed to. But if you're out here and you're doing things that are making it challenging for the rest of the players to interact, and you want to give them some sort of consequence, just randomly cursing them with something they touch, I don't think that's necessarily the best way to go. But I do think a lot of what Vortex and I were talking about earlier was ingraining the curse as a part of the player, right? Like you wanna make sure that it connects with them. It's something that weirdly enough, they can enjoy interacting with how they are either trying to help solve this issue or how they are learning to live with this issue, right?
It's make it a challenge, don't make it debilitating.
Right. Like make it fun. Like even if it is debilitating in a way, it's like, imagine you're an ice mage and somehow you lose the ability to cast ice spells. that can be a game ender for some people. It's like, I don't want to play anymore now, like straight up.
But that's different than saying like,
but
you can't cast magic, right? That's debilitating versus
it could
altering.
be a challenge for that person to that somebody wants to overcome. But that player has to want to overcome it, right? It's not just like, oh, I'm going to give you this curse. You got to figure out how to deal with it now. It's like, make sure that what it is that they're dealing with is something that is worth giving to that person. Because if all you're doing by giving it to that person means there's one less player for you guys to play with, then
if all the curse is doing is taking away from their enjoyment and adding nothing to the overall experience.
And if all it ends up doing is just means that person no longer games with you anymore, then is it worth giving it to them? Is it worth... And to be honest, I was literally just talking about this before you came in. We were talking about how some DMs use curses as punishment, right? And depending on the severity of the player that you have, some DMs maybe that's exactly what they need to help because there are a lot of players out there who love to just bully other people and just do
it's a very touchy road to do things like that with punishment, but
very much so
it's a usable tactic. It's just be mindful when you use it and how you use it.
Be very aware of the results that it will likely have on your player if that's what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, curses I think are maybe they're a little bit more rare than they should be, but I don't think that I don't think you should fear using them. I just don't think that they should be used willy-nilly. It's just definitely one of those things. Be mindful when using them. Yeah. But use them more often, right?
And I feel like there's like this huge negative I mean, granted there should be, but like there's a huge negative connotation about it, kind of like there is around death, meaning that like players are so afraid of curses and death, right? They are so like the second they hear about it, they're like, get it away from me. But it's not like a fun thing you can interact with, but they're just like, no, I don't want it. And no, granted, I have plenty of chaos goblins that I DM with, and they don't care. Give me all the curses, like whatever, like just to cause chaos. But sometimes, like, I don't want them to be enticing, but just have them be less scary, to be more fun to interact with. I don't know, like an enjoyable challenge rather than just like a...
Too many DMs just try to make them, just like everything else, they just try to make them way more than they need to be, right? I just had a brilliant idea for either a one-shot, or maybe not a one-shot, but like if you wanted to do a interesting campaign, like a series of one shots, but it's all one campaign, right? So you're just kind of basically like, I want to do a couple gaming sessions of the same story or the same party, but I don't want to make it like one big thing. I kind of want to make it like individualized one shots, but the same people. Mm-hmm. Get a group of people together, have them all make characters, and start them all out with an individual curse. And the whole goal, every gaming session, is who's getting cured this gaming session. Mm. So you have all the curses figured out, and you have all of the one-shots to cure them. So every time they show up, it's like, who's getting cured today? So that's how the gaming session starts. They all, as a party, they decide who gets cured, and then that's the gaming session they play. That's the one-shot. They go and cure this person.
Although I will say it will suck for whoever's last. Because that means that every single gaming session, they had to play it being cursed.
So that's the tactic, though, is whose curse should be removed first? Should it be the healer who can't heal? Yes. Is it the archer who's half blind? It's like there's so many different, but that would be unique, right? A gaming session where everyone starts out with their own curse, and the whole point is they have to go and cure themselves. So instead of this long ass drawn out plot thing, you have like 6 gaming sessions, 1 for each player. And the thing is they can succeed or not. You know what I mean? It's one shot.
I really like this idea. Like I have a weird implementation vision for that. It's more like, I saw this one show called Lock and Key or something like that, where they have all these different keys basically that can do different things, and one of them can literally let you go into somebody's mind, right? Like walk around into their mindscape. And my idea was like everyone's inflicted and they all have like a simple debility, but when you go and enter into their mind to cure them of whatever it is, like that person has a full-on like curse effect, and that is what you're working on overcoming throughout your journey to like cure them or whatever. I think that would be a very interesting concept to play with.
Yeah. Starting everybody out with the curse, I think, would just be a new plot point. Just like, what's the goal? Stop being cursed. Or, you know, it could just be everything of like you all have a different cure. Like, you know, you're all cursed. You have X number of days in game to live, but you all wake up with a note of how to remove your curse. Like basically, you know, like a saw. But just go have fun in D&D.
Figure it out.
Each of you have a cryptic message, and you all have 100 in-game days. So that's another way. A lot of people wonder, like, how do I use time in game? Do that. You have 100 days for all of you to figure it out. So be mindful of what you do, when you rest, where you go, how long it takes, because you all have a time limit.
And it's like there's a way you can do it to where everyone survives, but if you screw around too much, or if you make too many poor decisions, you might lock yourself where you got to choose who lives and who dies.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of cool.
Interesting.
All right, so let's take a look at the history of curses, because this will also give us some insights into what we've been talking about a little bit, and how, you know, how on the mark or how off the mark we are compared to what D&D has officially said, and how they've officially said we should be using curses. So let's start with the history of... So we're not going to go into everything about curses, but we're basically going to be covering the history of curse removal. From the original aspects of D&D, we're going to go through all the additions and basically just give a little bit of a description of what each edition did with curses and the removal of curses, and then we'll end it off with a little bit more discussion about like the various things that I've encountered as a player and the things that I've done as a DM to help people remove curses, cursed items, and things like that. So let's go all the way back in time. Let's go all the way back to OD&D, the original D&D before first edition. Now, this was really interesting because in OD&D, there really wasn't any actual system. Like most things in OD&D, there wasn't an official system, but the concept was there. We had ideas. Primarily, these were introduced either via homebrewing by the original creators, like Gygax himself. He had like curses and curse removal in his very first campaign, which ended up becoming like the Gygax module later on down the road. So he had the concept of it, but it was primarily either in homebrewing, well, what we call homebrewing nowadays. Again, it's the reason why I don't like calling it homebrew, is because back in the day, like OD&D, that's just how you played. Like, I want to cast a spell. How does it work? I don't know. How is it supposed to work? That work. Like home brewing is the idea of changing the game, but like that was the game, was creating it, right? So a lot of people like had it. There were eventually some supplemental books that came out with concepts for curses, but primarily it was this idea of if you were cursed, you had to do something special, you know. And a lot of the times, DMs would create either some concept of a spell, because there wasn't a remove curse spell, or they would do some sort of ritual, you know, get these exotic materials, go to this fantastic place, do these certain steps and make these certain rolls. Sometimes it was you have to go find this certain shaman or deity, or you have to go find an NPC that can remove it for you. But basically, it was conceptual only, rarely used. Usually it was a plot point. Usually it was like a big deal.
Yeah.
It wasn't really like... You weren't really cursed in battle or anything like that. It was usually based on the story, and everything about it was pretty much roleplay based, right? So there wasn't any rules. It was just curses. We basically look at it. OD&D used curses just like you would in Mythos, like again as a story. Yeah. You know, you're cursed because your family or this deity curses you, or you know you stumbled across the ancient cursed weapon. Like it wasn't really it wasn't really a nailed down mechanic. It was just why not curses, magic. Like curses make sense.
Yeah, it fits.
And then we go Flash forward a couple years into a D&D first edition. So Advanced Dungeons and Dragons first edition, we finally got some formalized rules. They finally introduced cursed items. So we actually got our first a concept of an item will be bad if you touch it and hold on to it. And a lot of the times these came with the first detrimental effects. So this was the first time we understood beyond the idea of legends and mythos and real world like ideas of curses and plot points. First edition finally said, yeah, like you touched this, you done fucked up.
Right.
And then the primary method they decided was pretty much just giant, powerful magic spells. That's when we finally got remove curse and dispel magic, which yes, dispel magic removed most curses back then because it was a consistent magic effect. Okay. So they just looked at remove curse or dispel magic could work it. And then of course they kept on with the role play aspect because sometimes you still needed more elaborate solutions, usually via quest or NPC. So right. Again, first edition was just kind of like, hey, we got some rules. We understand. Yes, here's items that can afflict a curse. We got some spells. We figured it out. We all knew spells should be able to do it. So here's an actual spell written down. But working into the story, have them play with it. That was still the push. AD&D second edition, my favorite. Cool. Basically. They didn't really do a whole lot of adjustments at this point. They refined it a little bit more. Removing curses became more focused on magic. So it was really more about finding a powerful spell or finding a powerful entity, a deity, a mage, something to remove the curse, and pretty much just using roleplay and in-game challenges, right? So get to a certain location, find a certain item, defeat a certain creature to get a certain material. I mean, same old, really going back to the old days, from the first edition, and just keeping true with the idea that it was really supposed to be ingrained as a plot hook. It was really supposed to be ingrained as what the players were doing and adventuring for. And then we go into 3rd and 3.5, right? Because, 3.5, just massive upgrade to 3. But when 3 and 3.5 came out, they started to give us, this is really when D&D started to give us more detailed rules for curses and cursed items. So 2nd edition really didn't do a whole lot in terms of evolution. It just really made it more formalized, made it more accessible, and made it more common to see curses and cursed items, and really just kept it on the DM side of things. With 3 and 3.5, we got a lot more detailed rules. The remove curse spells remain the staple, so we still have, remove curse, dispel. I don't think dispel magic was working at this point. I'm pretty sure once we got into 3 and 3.5, it was only curse remove, or it was only remove curse that worked in 3.5. I don't think the other spells worked so well, but they did start to make it a little bit more flexible in terms of what could remove a curse, because before, again, it was very vague. It was just, hey, make them go do these grandiose adventures and things like that. So they became more flexible. They were like, hey, maybe they don't quite need all of these grandiose things. Maybe they can just go to a local church and do them a favor, something like that. But in 3rd edition and 3.5, they did actually give DMs a guideline for creating cursed items and making them unique in that sense. So we actually finally in 3.5, instead of just having a make a curse on your own, whatever you say, or instead of just saying, hey, here's a pamphlet of the cursed items, they started to give you ideas on how to formulate your own. What would be a good balance? What do you take away? What do you give them? What's the purpose of it? Things of that nature. And they finally also introduced us mechanics for identifying. So this is the first, so it wasn't until 3.5, and this is one of those situations where this is one of those mechanics I've taken and adopted, even though I play 2nd edition. This is one of those mechanics I think 3.5 added that I thought was good. So I'm adding it into mine, into High Point, even though it's not a 2nd edition aspect. But 3rd edition introduced the mechanic for identifying cursed items before they were used. So this was the first time they finally came out and said, okay, we get it. Cursed items are kind of a bitch because y'all are loot whores. Y'all are murder hoboing loot whores, okay? You're literally going to pick up everything, and y'all are sick and tired of picking up the first shiny dagger you see and being like, oh, well, I'm cursed. You pick up that sword, I'm cursed. You pick up that necklace, I'm cursed. And you guys were tired of it. So what did they do? They finally added the mechanics and the understanding of, hey, there's an aura on that. Or I want to do sense magic, sense evil. Basically, they finally started saying, yes, people can know they're fucking cursed before they touch them. Congratulations. We don't get to screw you over as DMs anymore. But again, I do like that. I don't think that it needs to be used all the time. I don't think that they always need to be a warning. I love putting a cursed item in a warded room, in a locked room that doesn't really look like a treasure room, but maybe a treasure room, and a bunch of warnings that the characters can't fucking read because they're either ruined or in a different language. I love doing that. That's fucking great because, hey, all the warnings are there. And it plays to that whole, concept, the real world concept. I don't know if you guys are interested, but there is a real world concept about like the evolution of language and the survivability of warning signs. And there's this whole theory behind it. Like a whole, there's people who actually have careers thinking about this because one of the biggest issues is all of like the nuclear waste that we have that we need to bury and keep, inert, or we isn't inert for, hundreds of thousands of years.
Right.
So it's fine. It's safe as long as we just don't touch it. But the problem is think about like language now. Think about just 200 years ago, how we have to decipher language. How the big trouble is, how do we create a warning sign today that even 100 years from now,
people are going to know you probably shouldn't touch this.
Yes. And linguists, scientists, very, very smart people literally dedicate their lives to
Is that why we got all these signs that just got like a X and the skull and crossbones and all that extra stuff?
And that's the thing is like they've even looked at the etymology of those signs and that's already changed. So what is a triangle going to be in 100 years? What is the stop sign, hexagon going to be? What is the skull and crossbones going to be? Mm-hmm. Like at some point, like
that's very fair.
What we used to represent death 100, 200 years ago is not how we represent death now. You know what I mean? Like think about this. In our lifetime, I mean, not like we're that old, but I mean, just in the quickness of how technology changes and how communication changes, think about how much of a decline you and I have seen from our childhood to now, the decline in the headstone and the RIP. You see RIP all the time. RIP is still there. RIP, that sucks. You know what I mean? You die in a game, RIP. But remember when we were growing up, drawing the headstone and the RIP was like the headstone was the symbol. We didn't grow up using skull and crossbones, but you see that in text messages and in IMs way more than you see the graves. No one uses the gravestone to represent that anymore.
Interesting.
The gravestone isn't the go-to RIP.
Yeah.
It's the skull and crossbones. It's the I'm dead. You know what I mean? Like the I'm dead skull face.
Yes.
We don't go to the gravesite anymore. We go straight to the skeleton. But skeleton 20 years ago to us would never have meant that. It would have only meant pirates
or Halloween or something like that.
So it's that concept of, so this is why I like this. It's not only because it's realistic, or mainly because it's realistic, but I do like it because it does create a different challenge, right? Like, are you actually seeing warning signs, or are these warning signs meant to like how cool would it be, right? Imagine this dungeon. The players are going through this dungeon and it's leading them to a bad room. Like the cursed room. There could be a big treasure room, and then there's the bad room with the cursed item. And the dungeon has all these symbols on the wall, which, according to the players, looks like arrows. So they just think they're pointing towards the treasure room. They're going to follow the arrows. But what you don't tell them is until they like get somewhere, maybe get a tablet, maybe in the treasure room there's a tablet that deciphers all the writing. Mm-hmm. And that arrow, because when you think of an arrow, right, you think of a line and then like a V, right, that points.
Right.
But imagine that you find the tablet in the treasure room, if they go the right way or if they, survive and then get there, and they decipher all the text, and that arrow is actually incomplete. And what they realize is actually it's like this, like there's that, but the arrow they don't touch. So it's more like this. It's a line with a cone.
Like it's getting eaten?
Or a breath weapon. So imagine all of these arrows pointing this. So they're walking this way. Like, oh, the arrows point this way. They get to this room, and the room is literally designed to blow open like a breath weapon. And those are warning signs saying, don't go this way, explosion. That's their word for explosion, because think about it. It explodes outwards, and something comes out the middle.
Interesting.
But if you design it properly and they don't do the research, you give them the chance, right? You give them all the opportunities to learn it. But if they don't, you could easily create something like that that is misunderstood.
Yeah.
And so that's why I don't mind this idea of, I like the idea of identifying a curse, but I also don't mind making that a challenge. You know, if no one's magical, they don't feel any like. So this is something that I've also added in High Point. This is, I guess, a feature that I've added. I don't really know if it's considered a feature, but it is something ingrained that I've just always had. Any magic user, any character that chooses a magical class has this feature automatically. I don't tell them this. That's something that they all discover on their own, or, you know, if they try to, because I feel like as a magic user, if you could do this, unless you were directly told by the people who taught you magic, this would be something that would just be innately discovered, right?
Yeah.
So again, it depends on their background and how they do it. But the ability to sense magic is innate in all of my magic users in High Point. Like, if you were to pick something up and say, is this magical? Like, do I sense it? I'd actually tell you, yes, you sense something. Different magic users have different senses, but any magic user can typically get some sort of magical sense off of a magical item.
Would you say for somebody like Dovd, because his magic is more...
Yours doesn't count. You would not be able to pick up a magical dagger or a magical scroll and tell that there's magic off of it because you don't have magic. Dovd isn't magical in that same sense.
That's what I was thinking.
Because that is not the same type of magic. That is you are a communicative type of magic. You're not a transmission type of magic. Magic doesn't flow through you. You and magic cooperate. You and nature through magic cooperate, whereas everybody else commands magic. They tell magic what to do. They operate magic. They move magic through them and manifest it.
I don't want magic to be my slave. I want it to be my friend.
Exactly. You and it's that's the biggest difference between like that. Like, same thing with druids. They don't wield magic. They commune with magic.
Interesting.
So again, that's why
I like that.
I said this in like one of the other live streams. This is why I don't really play mages, is because I like wizards. I just don't really like the overall concept of how D&D has treated magic. Like, all of the things they've done, all of the features, all of the classes are brilliant, but the fundamentals of magic just aren't there for me.
Yeah.
You know, the difference between someone who controls and manipulates and transfers magic versus someone who communes with it is just lost in D&D. There is no separation of that, and I feel like that's
it's kind of just like, I get why they want to do that, is so it feels balanced across the board. Because doing what you've done is really, I think a lot of people will have a hard time saying, like,
it's too complex.
Very much so,
and it's not as receivable. Like, the way D&D has done it, it's so much more acceptable, right? You can go from any magic class to the next magic class, and it's the same process. I like the details. I like the idea that if you or a druid, or trying to think of like what else is magical but doesn't have that like same type of magic. But yeah, it's like, yeah, the fact that you don't sense magic the same way, you don't manipulate magic, you vibe with it in a way. Like, I think that matters, because the reason why it matters, Dovd would not be affected by anti-magic shield, because nature doesn't give a fuck
about anti-magic.
Because yes, it is magic that you're using. It is in a sense of magic, but whereas anti-magic field, in my sense, stops the manipulation of magic. It stops wizards from drawing it in. It stops them from manipulating it, and it stops it from manifesting. But that's not what Dovd is doing. Dovd is asking nature. Dovd is communing with nature and saying, you and I work together, and nature agrees.
Think about midichlorians and how they are in all things, right? If there is some sort of anti-magic shield, right, you're not gonna like remove the magic that's in all things. You are gonna stop somebody from breaking through a certain barrier to manipulate it on that side.
Yeah.
Right? But if what's happening...
It's like stopping a Wi-Fi signal when I'm hardlined.
Yeah, exactly.
You can stop my signal all you want, but I'm hardline, bitch. And that's the same thing. Like, a druid, I don't think most druids I think like druids could be affected by anti-magic, but not all of their spells. Like, I would say that if a druid was an anti-magic, maybe they couldn't shapeshift, maybe they couldn't wild shape. I could understand that because it's a manifestation. But why should talk with plants be affected?
I mean,
you know what I'm saying? Like I could make I could see arguments being made for, again, depending upon the usage of it, there are types of magic that would be stopped and types that wouldn't be.
I could totally see that, especially if a lot of, because there's ones that literally just help you commune with nature and interact with like nature's innate essence, right?
Exactly. And I think that's the difference. And that's why, again, I really like breaking it all down, because you can have those unique situations. I mean, one of the very first reasons I broke this down was my when I first did my walkthrough of all of these, is the scenario I love bringing up when I talk about why, one of the main reasons why I broke them all out. Why did I change magic? And part of the reason is, like, you know, the anti-magic sphere. Like, why should a bender be affected the same way as a mage who had to do difference with magic? But my favorite scenario is explaining, if you took all of my my magic users from High Point and you threw them all, you basically stripped them naked, took all of their stuff away, and threw them all in a locked cell, and knocked them all out, threw them all in a locked cell. What happens when they all wake up? Right? If they're the traditional magic users of D&D, like especially in second edition when you have memorized spells, it's like, guess what? They all lost their spells. So they're useless. Without their books, they're fucking useless. They're all these high-powered magic users who are just naked people who have absolutely nothing. You could say, well, they're sorcerers, so they have innate magic. But what can, so they wake up and, what, they just have their magic now? Like, you know what I mean? Like, certain people had to get their magic, but the base types of mages in D&D, like, if you wake up in a cell with nothing, it's like most of them just were in the same boat. Just couldn't do anything, right? I wanted a little bit different. I wanted, based on the type of mage you chose, I wanted that scenario to be different. I wanted you, because of the choice you made, to have a different option, right? And that's why I broke out, when each of my types, between the wizard, the sorcerer, and a regular mage, if they're all knocked out, they'll all get their magic back in different ways. And in different time frames, right? So they all have access to their magic differently.
And I do like the fact that each one of them has, pros and cons to their magic working the way that it does. So it's not like, wizards can basically, they got no issues being locked in a cell. I don't care where I'm locked in. My magic's my magic, right?
As soon as I'm clear-headed, I'm throwing magic around all I want.
But, sorcerers, no matter where they are at, they have to have material components.
Something. They have to be able to...
They're manipulating something. And so, depending upon... we have talked about this before, depending on the type of sorcerer you are, maybe you're a very professional, very regal, very school-learned sorcerer, and so you have a little pouch that has all of your material components meticulously organized. You know where everything is, and you can cast very good and consistent and powerful spells using that. But
you're not creative in the moment. If you don't have your components, you're fucked.
You're no Edward Elric,
and again,
right?
That's my point. Is I love the fact that because the way I made the sorcerer, different people can play it differently. You still have the same challenge, but you don't have the same challenge as every magic user.
And it's consistent.
But your challenge is consistent with your way of playing that character. If you're super resourceful, you could pick up shit off the ground. But if you built your character with magic, maybe you only can use things that have latent magic ability. Whereas another sorcerer who says they can use just scraps off the ground, maybe you imbue it more, right? I like the idea of, again, those roleplay classes, being able to really bring them in. I know we're going off on another tangent here, but again, going back to third edition, adding in the ability to identify the cursed items.
Yeah.
I like the idea of hiding the warnings, but I think this was also a major pinnacle upgrade that it needed. Again, one of the reasons why I adopted this for second edition, being able to identify if an item is cursed.
Now,
in some way,
is this the same way that any magic user can just sense magic? You don't need to specifically cast something.
No, that's a high point thing that I just give people that latent ability. This was, they finally introduced the mechanics. So I think they had the identify spell is when we first saw I think this is when they allowed the identify spell
to determine whether it's cursed or not.
I think this is when they allowed.
I know there are
like
some
detect
curses
evil.
that still specifically say even if you cast the identify spell, you won't.
And those are to make them more powerful. But yeah, that's I think when identify, detect evil. And there was a couple other spells that would trigger.
That's actually interesting. I never realized Detect Evil would be able to.
I'm pretty sure Detect Evil can do cursed items. I think it was in a supplementary book.
Right.
I also believe that this is when they added auras to cursed items, so you could use Detect Aura on the item and see if it was cursed. So these are when I say they introduced the mechanics for identifying cursed items. It wasn't just that they said cursed items are noticeable or they say that they're cursed. They just started realizing that yes, these are valid reasons why you could be wary of this item, and you can cast these things to be sure that you found a sword in the middle of a dungeon in a room full of skull and bones.
Maybe
we should look at the aura. Like we should. Is it evil? Is it just giving off a blood red aura or something? Right. So those are what 3 and 3.5 finally did for us. Is they got us to a stage where we finally started feeling comfortable with cursed items. Right. They're not as scary. We can kind of figure them out now, but now we have a lot more rules, and now we're still keeping with that age-old tradition of keep it role play, keep it personal to the characters, but we're giving DMs more information. We're giving them some guidelines. We're giving them some concrete things to follow, so we can keep
ways
consistent.
For the players to intentionally interact with it.
And that means that we're also seeing the adoption. That they wouldn't be putting it in here if people didn't use it and people didn't play it. So it seems that every edition they're realizing that more and more people are adopting these ideas. So it's becoming more open, and people want this. They want this structure so they can get better at using them. And then, of course, we come to, well, y'all know. Basically, this one did fucking nothing because they try to streamline everything. The remove curse spell was pretty much the only way to remove curses in this edition. And it was basically standardized to where you cast remove curse, it's gone, done deal, move on, because everything was streamlined to just get right back into combat and no one cares about roleplay. So that's what happened in that edition. No one cares. And then we come back to 5th edition finally, where everything got fixed. We did a very fantastic return of the narrative driven elements. So 5th edition, when they came back, 3rd edition tried to formalize it, tried to write it up nice and neat and try to give us some guidelines. Then they got rid of it because there's dumb. And then 5th edition was like, you know what? 3rd, you did some great updates. We like that. But we really got to go old school. We got to keep back to the old school. And 5th edition came back, kept these standardizations, kept the formalities, but really went back to the narrative-driven elements. And what they really wanted to do was try to help streamline the acceptance again. They wanted to get this as part of a normal, again, not common to where you see it all the time, but be normal to be accepted. Of course, the remove curse spell is still the primary go-to. Magic is still the primary go-to, but 5th edition does lean much more into role play. They want the curse to mean something more for the story and the player. They want them to go through a trial and tribulation. This isn't meant to be a one and done. It's not just meant to be debilitated in a fight, go to the town, get rid of it, move on. It's meant to, even before where it was kind of just another challenge. Like in the earlier editions, it just felt more like a tool, another thing to throw at you, right? Whereas 5th editions, now it's more like, make it part of the story. Make it last. Give it a couple sessions. Make them do something that's not part of the story to get rid of it, right? 5th edition just really was like, make them have fun with this, give it life. And that's really what I think they're trying to go back to, is that now that we figured it out, now that we know what we want out of these things, let's go ham on it. And although the remove curse is still there, 5th edition leans much more heavily into having DMs encourage and incorporate personal quest lines, NPC interactions, and or just creative solutions to moving curses. So even 5th edition's like, we gave you guys a bunch of cool guidelines, but really make it a thing. Make it a thing, right? Don't just have them go to the local church. Have them go to the monastery that's in the middle of the mountains and talk to the church elder and bring him a certain flower that only grows on a certain face that he can't get anymore because it makes his favorite tea. Shit like that, right? And I love that. I love that 5th edition didn't just keep going with the, yep, it's a curse. Give some bad stuff and let them get rid of it. You know, they really wanted it to be incorporated into the narrative and less into the mechanics. Mm-hmm. And that's what the direction I would take with it.
So I think one of the other things, something we mentioned briefly earlier when we were talking before we came on, but when it comes to the idea of curses having good features as well as bad features. Mm-hmm. So when you think about it, like, for example, the biggest time and place that I see that is in cursed weapons, right?
Yeah.
Because when it comes to a cursed weapon, there's got to be a draw to use it. And granted,
Other
like
than the
a lot of the draw is, you know, it's cursed and you're a lot of times you're compelled to use it, but you know, when you think about whether you want to deal with a curse or not.
Yeah.
And I genuinely mean deal with the curse. You got to think, is the benefit that I get from this worth it? Like,
yeah.
And so a lot of the times, like, they make the good of the cursed item fairly attractive to make the players willing to deal with the negative effect. And so that adds the element more long term to the story, which I totally get. You know, you don't want just a curse that someone's like, this sucks, let's get rid of it, and then it's gone, and then you're done.
You lose a permanent 5 to your AC. That's it.
You know,
goodbye.
It's the end of the world. So, like, but if you have something that is at least exciting enough to play with, like, I get that idea, but a lot of the curses that I have seen give a lot of good things as well as bad things. Now, if you're talking about like the bestow curse spell, just like the regular spell, it just does bad things.
Yeah, but that's different. That is the traditional, you've been cursed.
Yes.
And I think that's totally normal. Spells don't have a good and bad. No cantrip.
What would you say is the difference? The other side of it.
So realistically, you have, I guess I would categorize it as, you have targeted curses, and then you have like errant curses. Targeted curses are things like curse spells, attacks, things that are at you. Cosmic, if you guys are in the Discord, Cosmic posted something in the homebrew area that he's, testing out, but like his Tiamat Spite. That isn't a targeted attack. That is something that you had to go out and get, right? You had to go out and earn it, right? Not in a good way. No one's targeting you. No one's specifically going after you. It wasn't meant for you, or it
wasn't meant for you as a person. It was meant for people who fulfill this.
Yeah, you can call them both punishments, but I look at it, there's a very big difference between whether or not you were cursed or you got a curse. I think that's another way of putting it. Either you were cursed, as in someone or something went out of their way to target you specifically, for any reason, whether it's your family, where you live, but you were either targeted of a curse or you befell upon a curse, whether that's from an item, you triggered it, you pissed the wrong person off, maybe you're just the wrong target. There's a lot of different ways you can gain a curse.
What about dice?
So in that particular case, that would have been an errant curse. He wasn't specifically targeted. It was where he was from. He gained it. And again, it wasn't like an attack curse. And so the reason why I differentiate is like attack curses, targeted curses, I don't see why they should have any more of a good side than a cantrip. You know what I mean? Like Hellish Rebuke is a cantrip. That doesn't heal you. Doesn't give you faster speed. Doesn't give you AC because it takes your life away. It's a fucking spell. It's there to kill you. It's there to harm you. If someone's going to hurt you, if I'm going to curse you, Kage, if I in-game want to curse you, why would I design a spell to do anything for you? I want to find the nastiest, just craziest spell that will destroy your life. Why would I want to do anything beneficial? Right? I am doing that to you. You don't want it. I want to do it to you. I want that. That is my desire to push that on you. Whereas an errant spell, just an errant curse, one that's out there, whether it's on an item or something, no one's intending for you to get it, but but something or somehow it wants to be got, right? Whether it's the entity that created it wants it to be passed along, whether it was created by a tragic event and it just is and it just exists that way, whether it has some sort of sentience and it's trying to push itself, like, you know, the chick from The Ring. Like, you could even call that videotape a cursed item. It's it's watching it that bestows the curse, and there's a ritual to get out of it, right? It's that concept of, it wasn't for you, but you got it. You know what I mean? Right. And we don't hear about this in the movie, but you think about it, right? You watch the tape, you have 7 days until she kills you. And there's a ritual, copy it, give it to somebody else, and as long as they watch it, you're safe, right? Just spread it. That's the whole point. But no one ever talks about this part. They all die after 7 days, right? They all died after 7 days. Not a single one ever died earlier. So if you translate the ring, that curse, into D&D logic, you're cursed and you'll die in 7 days.
Technically invincible until the 7 days. But
that's the only way you'll die. So that could be a way to positively give an errant curse a push. You are going to die in 7 days, but you have 7 days to survive, and nothing can kill you until then. So use it to your benefit. So the idea between when to give a curse a positive and not, in my opinion, is whether the curse is targeted or errant. If it is just a curse that's out there, why? Like, it could have a positive because that's its allure. And the positive doesn't have to be intentful. It doesn't have to be, you know, this is going to get good and therefore you're accepting the bad. It's just, it could be an aura. Like, I think an errant curse, a bejeweled sword, a diamond encrusted bejeweled sword that is made out of pure platinum, but wielding it gives you a disadvantage. That is a positive. Like, yes, you still get all the curses. You don't want to drop it or anything. But as you wield it, you imagine yourself as like the most powerful person ever, right? Every attack you make with this gets an extra +6 if you crit. Like, you have all these cool things, but it's like the whole point is the allure is what gets you to it. Then you have the curse. And I always like to have reasonings, right? Like having that, like the whole thing of this sword makes you swing with disadvantage, but it's jewel encrusted. It's like, well, yeah, anyone's going to be allured to it to pick it up. But why? Why have those two things? Why have a gold sword that makes you miss? Yes, it's something that is alluring and it's a bad thing. Therefore, it makes a good cursed item. But for me, the difference then is, well, why? Is this from the god of trickery? Is this from the god of money? You know, is this, you know, from the god of bad fortune? So you got a really expensive item, that's the good fortune, but right. The bad, like to me, if you're just saying here's a good, here's a bad, I threw in the good so you'd grab it, and then I threw in the bad so you'd hate it. That doesn't work for a curse. Like, that's not enough. To me, it's more of a, if the curse, they don't have to be perfectly like of the same coin. They don't have to be like a 1-to-1 match of the good and the bad have to be like, you know, equal and opposite, but they just have to make sense, right? Like, why would you make a golden jewel encrusted like claymore for a barbarian? You'd be better off creating a golden dagger to get the rogue to want to steal it. And then the idea is that anytime the curse is that, you know, the everyday, like, any money that the rogue has on them, 10% disappears, like up to 10% disappears or something, right? Like, it's just that whole thing, but then it gets goes into the dagger, right? So as long as you hold the cursed item, it actually grows. So like every 100 coins, it grows into the next sized sword. So it goes from like a tiny throwing knife, but if it stays with you long enough, you keep losing money, but now it's a dagger. Now it's a short sword. Now it's a long sword. Because it just keeps siphoning the gold off you.
That rogue's not going to be able to wield it anymore. It gets into a great sword.
And then it's for somebody else. But, like, you know what I mean? Like, those things make sense. But just saying, here's a reason that you want it, and now here's a reason to hate it, I don't think that's enough. So, yeah, it comes down to, if it's targeted, it doesn't need any positives. If it's errant, if it's just out there, it doesn't need positives, but it needs an allure for a reason. Did the entity want people to use this, right? You want people to be allured to it, so therefore you make it visually striking. Or if it was created for the purpose of getting someone to use it for something, you put all of the lore and energy into the mythos behind it, which is all the good things that it will do for you. and then you ignore the curse part because that's the whole point. You want it to achieve its goal. Like, you have to decide what I think the best part, I think the first thing you should always do when creating a cursed item is figure out the why. What is the goal of the cursed item? Do you want it to be used for something? Are you just creating it to mess with your players? Does it have a lore purpose? Once you know that, then you can decide what's the good and the bad. You know, if it's not targeted at them, if someone didn't create it just specifically to go after them, you have to have an enticing. That's what the positive. You have to have something enticing about it. But the enticing just has to make sense, right? If you're targeting rogues, the enticing part could just be that it looks expensive. But once they grab it, they don't want to sell it. That right there is a bitch. You have the most expensive weapon in the world, but you will never let it go.
Do you feel like I guess this is specific to cursed items, but do you feel like every cursed item needs to or should, I mean, granted, like, none of us here are really needs to or should people, but generally speaking, do you think every cursed item would make most sense to have the feature where you are compulsed not to give it away and you are compulsed to always have it? You're compulsed to, like, keep it close and to keep it yours.
In my opinion, calling something a cursed item intuitively, I think that when you call something a cursed item, that is, without saying otherwise, I believe that's completely implied. I think that the bare concept of a cursed item, the bare minimum of a cursed item, is that once obtained, you don't want to or cannot get rid of it. I think that is one of the fundamentals of a cursed item, is regardless of what its allure is, whatever reasoning you might want to grab it, regardless of what you do, I think every cursed item should have some sort of allure, some sort of reasoning to touch it, put it on, grab it, do whatever, whether it looks good, has an aura, or has lore to it. It needs to have an enticement. I think just innately, if you don't say otherwise, it can't or won't be removed, as in you just don't want to or can't. And it needs a removal trigger, whether it's the spell, a ritual. I think those are the three things. So, any severity of those is fine. Now, that doesn't mean, I want to preface this, that doesn't mean that there aren't the exceptions.
Sure.
There are, like, I like when you have something like one of my favorite cursed items is the unlucky rabbit's foot. Right? You get a rabbit's foot where you can get really big things of luck, but, like, every other thing is really, really bad. Mm-hmm. Or something like that, where it's like it. But so that one you can give up. Let me ask you this: that one you can get rid of.
What's your main mindset behind that being an implied staple in a cursed item?
In my opinion, in all of my history, in reading up on cursed items that D&D has put out, and in the concept of it, right? The reason why I say that should be typically implied as a general rule, unless you want to change it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with changing it. I think the reason why it's an implied rule is because without that, it does render the cursed item useless. Like, the moment I pick up this item and find out there's anything wrong with it, the fact that I can just immediately go, nah, I'm good. Yes, we always talk about player agency, but a cursed item, in my opinion, is designed to not take away, but to disrupt.
No. And I do agree with that.
It's meant to disrupt player agency. So,
but my question would be more to the lines of why, and I guess my thought is, I'm thinking that the idea of, okay, nah, I'm good, is a possibility. That would just provide the challenge for the DM to find a different reason for the struggle.
Well, no, and that's a very good point, because yes, you could make it so overwhelmingly good that they're willing to accept the curse, right? Like, there's a lot of different ways, but giving the player that full free agency, it's, in my opinion, taking that away, or at least limiting it with the curse, it takes away the metagaming aspect, because a lot of players will just be like, it's a curse item, I don't want it. Doesn't matter like what you try to offer. Yeah. It's hard for them to play character. And again, it's just that whole thing of, if they can just put it down, or if there's no compulsion after the fact, it is only usable as far as the character wants it to be. Like, they'll use it until it's no longer usable. And to me, why call it a curse? Why not just say it's a weapon with some weird features? Like, the idea of it being a curse, because a curse, and this is also just how I take lore and mythos, a curse is realistically meant to stick with you, right? Calling it a cursed item versus a broken item is just like, it's saying to me that you shouldn't be able to just willy-nilly walk away. It's meant to stick.
There's this anime that I watched a while back. I haven't fully finished it, so I don't know how it plays out, but it's called Shield Hero.
Haven't heard of it.
It's pretty good. There's like these like 4 or 5 cardinal heroes. One's a bow hero, a spear hero, a sword hero. Okay. And those are the ones everybody cares about, likes. Those are all the cool ones, the ones that actually have weapons. But then there's a shield hero where everyone thinks he's like the weirdo, he's the lame one of the group, whatever.
Okay.
Anyways, so there's this feature that he unlocks, which is this weird like dragon transformation. Because the majority of his abilities are literally just shield things. Yeah. Like he can put stuff in bubbles, he can do all these other, but he's found like really creative ways. Not very offensive, but he's found very creative ways to be offensive with his defensive spells, which is really cool.
It's like learning at a shield bash. You can block all you want, but the moment you realize I could smash
yeah.
someone's face in pretty hard with this.
And it's got different transformations, and they get stronger over time, all this extra stuff. But there's this one ability that he got that basically turns him into this, like, fire dragon.
Like a tank. Basically, it's like, I've been a shield so long, I'm now a tank. Which means I can also fuck some shit up.
And he does. And that's when, up until a certain point in the anime, he becomes his most powerful, right? Yeah. And so for him, like, the shield has so many other abilities and so many other things where he doesn't necessarily have to feel the drawback of the shield if he doesn't want to. But in the anime, like, this shield, this specific aspect of the shield was sentient, and it was constantly talking to him and trying to convince him to use it, right? Because it was basically his get out of jail free card. It was basically your Super Saiyan card. But every time he used it, it slowly like ate away at you and became
that took you over. Yeah,
it was like one of those things where it's like more and more alluring for you to use it every single time. It's harder and harder for you to say no using it every single time.
That's a pretty common trope too. I mean, that's also used in Dresden,
right?
With like mantles. So a lot of the times that's how mantles typically operate, is because they're so powerful. They'll mantles, or on a much lower power level concept, like possessions. You know, things like that, like some of the weapon, like we talked about, like the difference between sentience and intelligence. A sentient item can never take you over. It can never do anything outside of its programming. Whereas an intelligent item, if you're ever in a weakened state, that intelligent item, certain intelligent items can actually learn how to psychically attack you. And if they win,
and
psychically you switch.
We were just talking about that Dai Diabachi. Once you reach a certain lowness in your intelligence, it basically takes over and it starts running
and it turns you into that. But in High Point, like, if you have an intelligent sword or whatever, and let's say it's evil or whatever, right, and you're pissing it off and it doesn't like you, if you ever get into a compromised state, it could actually, if it knows what it's doing, if it's learned its thing, it can basically initiate a psychic contest with you. And if you kind of like basically death throws, if you lose too many, it will actually take over your body and force you into the weapon. And
would something like Intellect Fortress from the
that can help.
Okay.
In that particular case, because it's a psycho battle, those things help.
Okay.
But the concept of like an ever growing, like, again, and that's a good idea. Like, we always think of cursed items as having immediately debilitating aspects, but a cursed item could, again, be something that isn't immediately cursed, right? You could say, hey, I got this ring, I don't want to take it off. And for the purposes, it doesn't do anything, but let's say you find out it can heal me by 1 HP. But every time I use it,
that's kind of why I asked
1 HP to the heal. But at the same time, every 10th use, it reduces my max HP by 10.
See, that's kind of why I asked the question, is because if I'm thinking about a curse innately having the feature of you don't want to put it down and you always have it, I think the very first thing anyone's going to think of is, how do I get rid of this? Because nobody, I mean, granted, there could be some...
But see, that's the metagaming aspect. That's where you have to get out of that.
Well, no, but not not just the player, the party.
But see, but that's metagaming, because in the aspect of when you pick that thing up, it's not like suddenly
I'm talking specifically about when people become aware of it, not metagaming.
Okay, so you're just saying like when they find out
if
that
anyone becomes aware of this.
But that should be the case, though. It's a cursed weapon. I mean, it doesn't matter whether or not they find out you can't get rid of it or if it has a negative. Usually, once you discover a curse, you want to get rid of it. That's what the innate aspect of a curse.
That's what I mean when I'm talking about. I think if we change the narrative on an innate aspect of a curse, it can be more enjoyable for our players to interact with. And what I mean by interact with is similar to how Dice interacted with his curse. Dice was not in a place where he was out there trying to find how to get rid of his curse.
No, but that's because of how it. But see, I disagree that the fact that the curse makes you want to keep it. I don't think that has anything to do with their desire to get rid of it. I think it has to do with the negatives. If the negative, it doesn't matter if you don't want to get rid of it. If you find that out later that it's cursed and you don't want to get rid of it, but you still say, guys, like party, we've proven the negatives are not at all a curse. Like we would like these positives way more. Like, so what? Every now and again, I take some damage. We've proven we can get over that. So I'll take the damage. I'll be fine with it. Like I don't think that
I think there are scenarios where somebody could, or like somebody could.
I'm just saying that when you bring up cursed item, my immediate thought is, okay, so they're gonna pick it up. They don't want to put it down. If you say no, that's not how it works. I'm not saying that that's breaking the cursed item.
For sure.
I just think that in general, if it's not mentioned, I think that it is implied that it is cursed. Therefore, it's on you until you do something. Because again, a curse that you have is different than a cursed item. And maybe that's also what we have to talk about, right? A curse is just an infliction, whereas a cursed item is, this item is with you, therefore it's affecting you. That's why I think it's also because it's the item affecting you. It needs to affect you either by being locked on you or by you not wanting to have it removed. And that's also two different things, because we've actually talked about this before stream. So let's say you have a ring, right? This is how my DM used to do it. His cursed items were irremovable. Not just that the person wouldn't. I think he might have had a rule where only the cursed person can remove it. So like if you have a ring, if you try pulling this ring, it'll never come off, but I can remove it. But I'm compulsed not to. So kind of like in your area, I could whenever I wanted to. I have the power to. But I'm compulsed by the item not to. So either you'd have to like overcome that compulsion, like, get through to me, or, figure out some way to do it, right? But he would do a thing where the item was stuck on you until you either, ritualistically removed it or you intentionally removed it. And so what he would do is like, let's say if it was ring, if the party knocked you out and cut off your finger, the ring would disappear and reappear on the body somewhere, anywhere. And it could be on another finger as a ring. It could be on a toenail, or it could be suddenly pierced on your ear. And now you have a ring-sized earring, right? Literally, he would just randomly have it appear on your body. The idea is the item wasn't going to come off. That is one type of magical curse. But
now, would you say that replaces the compulsion type
no,
deal?
He did both. It was magically bound to him. No other person can remove it, but the wearer can remove them. They are just also compulsed not to, which is why you had to figure out how can you overcome their compulsion mentally. And there was different ways, like you can get into their head, and basically like if you could puppet them, you could make them take it off, because they can take it off themselves. Mm-hmm. But they can't do it. They don't want to, but they can. So again, his was this was his way of doing it. But in terms of like, that's a magically bound one, right? That's one that will not leave you. Whereas you could have a curse where you just don't want to remove it, but let's say you're asleep and your party just goes, all right, it's not under the curse anymore. That can be a way you remove cursed items. Maybe it's just you can't remove the cursed item off of you and you won't let anyone do it. But if you're asleep, then you're asleep, and you don't have to. So there are two types of magically bound. There's two types of way a curse can be bound. You can say that thing is not coming off you. It is bound to you.
And from your perspective, both of those
fulfill
the mindset of that you have when it comes to curses.
Yes, I think that whichever one you want, I think doesn't really matter. Again, I think it's all just based on what you preface it with. I just say that, again, just talking to me, if you say there's this cursed item or this item is cursed, I'm just immediately going to assume, so if I put that on, it's not coming off, either because I don't want it to or because it won't. That's all I'm saying is if you say, no, that's not how it works. Oh, okay, fine. That's not how it works. It's just, to me, when I think of a cursed item, when I say this is cursed, if I don't say anything else, it immediately implies this is never going to come away from you, whether you like it or not. Now, again, I will sometimes change whether it's magically bound to you, whether it's just you don't want to give it up. There's a lot of different ways I'll go about it. But when something's cursed, I just assume the whole point is it's not easy to get rid of.
This weirdly brings an interesting point to my mind, and this is slightly off topic, but how do you feel about teleporting items off of people? And I know there's not necessarily like a specific spell for that, like, but I have to imagine somebody's tried it before.
Yeah, so I've actually put a lot of thought into like this, because there really isn't a teleport object spell currently. And I have thought a lot about that because like everything in D&D, if you think about it long and hard enough, you can think about why you shouldn't do it, right? Like, it's kind of like if you look at all the different ways you can technically use things by rules as written, you can get away with almost anything. You can just be OP at level 1 in 100,000 different ways for no goddamn reason, right? It's more about creativity. But when it comes to usability, if you had the ability to just be like, bam, what's to stop anyone from being like, oh, he's about to cast a spell? Oh, took his wand. Oh, all his magic's coming from that crown of his? Took his crown. Took his ring. Like, it would be way too easy for anyone, the DM, the players, to just have this on the ready. I mean, every mage, first thing they would do is if there's any sign of other magic users, well, I ready my teleportation spell. The first thing he uses for magic, I'm going to take it from him. He pulls out a scroll. I cast the scroll now. You know what I mean? Like,
you could say that about power word kill, technically, but that's because it's a higher level spell.
Exactly.
And so if we put something like this in a high tier, maybe make this a 7th level spell. Nobody's gonna use this on the jump just to take that away from them. I mean, maybe they do.
And then I have, for high point purposes, I have the problem justifying, well, what makes that such a high spell? If teleport self, if teleport other, if I can teleport my whole party at a much lower level spell than a coin across the room.
Well, we're saying there's a big difference. Like teleporting something from there to my hand, that's probably like a cantrip. But if we're talking about teleporting something off of a person, I feel like that.
But that's my point. Is like when you really dig into the magic, it to me, it becomes a lot more complex. And what I would probably end up doing for that, because you have levitation magic. Like if I can levitate something up, why can't I levitate the ring off your finger? You know what I mean? Like, why can't I just pull it? If I can pull anything with levitation, why can't I do? But that's not really done, right? It's not like you could make the argument, and a good DM would probably role play it out. And I think that's where something like this would role play, where if you could design a spell that was a teleport object spell. I mean, you could even make the argument most teleport spells are of touch. So to get something across the room would have to be a much higher level spell because you can't touch it, right? I dig that. I dig the idea of even trying to use teleport self and be like, well, what if I'm just touching their shoulder and I want to teleport their armor off of them, right? There's a lot that can be said about the viability of that. It just comes down to how often, how can it be used, when it should be used. And then of course you have just the like, I love to think about the mechanical purposes. So I also like to think about it like what do you think teleportation is? Because like if you think about teleportation, usually teleport self or teleport other, it works essentially like the movie Jumper. where they basically almost like make a wormhole, and they can just teleport anything they're touching comes with them. But they can't create the teleport, the objects from across the room. They'd have to go to it, and they can take anything with them. And they even had in the movie an explanation where you don't want to try objects too big, like you only want to worry about things around your size. And then it was even explained in the movie, someone tried to move a whole building once, and they asked what happened to him, and they said they never saw him again. The building never moved, or the building moved like an inch, but no one ever saw him again. So it's like, we don't know. The people who have tried it.
I mean, in the movie, he eventually, I think, almost does a building, or
he's
tethered to something.
Yeah, he does half a building in it. But that's what I'm saying is like, so you could look at it as, if you think of teleporting in the game like Jumper, you could easily explain, well, that will never happen because there is no remote teleport. But if you had the teleport, but I'm going here, if you did want to add it, it would be as easy if you wanted to make the limitation, because I think it would be a little OP to just take something off someone. I think that would be just a little, again, if you're trying to get an item.
I agree, without some sort of contest.
Exactly.
Or something to that effect.
But no, I just think in general, like, vaults are useless now. If I could see the item and I could teleport it into my hand, fuck a vault.
Well,
fuck a trap.
I mean, if you could see through a metal vault, maybe.
But no, I'm just saying, like, if I can see the object and there's traps in between here and there, but all I have to do is teleport it to me.
Right, but
like,
I mean,
like, forget.
That the same could technically be true of a teleportation spell.
But usually that's only one way. I mean, you have to have more than one. Usually you'd only have one. But I'm just saying, like, for me, it would feel a little bit more cheap to be able to teleport an object. But
I think there are physics you can put into the game, because you and I have talked about how a lot of physics introduce a lot of limitations and create those challenges.
This is what I was trying to get to, is like, so if you did want to put it in, right? Because normally teleportation is like on your person, or usually something that's like around your aura, right? You could say that your teleportation aura or something. If you wanted to do something from across the room, you could put the limitation that you have to be able to either see the object in full. So a ring isn't technically, you can't see my ring in full. You can see it full when it's on the table, but because I'm always obscuring it, you could make that limitation. Or you have to be able to, like, know the item. So, like, you could take a ring, because as long as I see it, I know what the ring looks like. I could take the ring off you. But your armor, how many straps do you have? How many buckles do you have? What leather type is it? I don't know about all your armor. I don't know what's behind your shield. I don't know what kind of handle you have. So maybe you could even just put the limitation. You can do a remote teleport as long as you can either see the object in its entirety without any obscuration. So even if it's like partially behind a wall, you can't teleport the whole thing. Or you have to be able to know the item in full. Like, so you couldn't teleport something that you've never visualized. Like, if you know someone's holding something, but you don't know, like, what it is,
right?
You can't just take it out of their hands. Right?
Yeah.
Like, not saying, like, if it's a note, you don't have to know what's written on the note.
Yeah.
But if they have a coin, if you don't know what currency it is and you don't know what's on it, if you can't visualize it, you can't take it.
Yeah.
Would be actually maybe a better use of that.
What I'm thinking of is almost like,
hey, what's up,
depending on who you are and what's going on. Like, obviously it would be much easier to do against like peasants or something like that, but if you're up against somebody else that's like powerful, they're trained or whatever, like everyone has like a certain aura around them. When you think about like monks and like their chi and their energy and stuff, they have a certain like energy that flows about them no matter who you are, whether you know how to tap into it or not. But if what you have is connected to that aura, if it's connected, if it's on you, if it's on your person, like, I'm not going to be able to just, it's almost like a contested, of wills. I can't just go into your mind without having to penetrate it first. In psionics, you have to be able to knock first. You have to be able to get in. So I kind of look at it as a similar mindset. It's like, in order for me to take something you're holding, you have on your body, you have on you, I have to somehow first penetrate that barrier, whether it's you protecting yourself with like a saving throw or something like that, or me trying to exert some sort of like...
I don't know if that would be good enough, though, because that would be inconsistent with the way that other magic is used. Like, not every magic has a saving throw. Not every magic has to penetrate this aura.
Right, but there's a reason why it would. And so if this follows the same logic as the reason why it would.
But you don't know that someone's trying to teleport your object. I just don't know. I mean, for high point purposes, I don't know if I can visualize or get into the idea that just because you're holding it, it's like that would make perfect sense for attuned items. Because it's attuned directly to you, so those items would be...
I would say those items are...
I would say those would require, like, a contest of contesting, right? Like, that's, like, basically, like, you would have to either be, like, twice their level or something. Like, because attunement is way different than just, I'm holding this
I would
object.
honestly say you cannot even attempt to teleport a tuned item unless you're using some, like... 8th, 9th level.
Yeah.
Spell slots.
I think attuned items deserve to be on a different level. I don't know. I think there's a reason why there's not a lot of like remote teleportation, because it's OP in some respects, and then it's also just because you look at it from the point of view of they can use it, you can use it, and just like with counterspell, right? Like there are times when
I keep seeing the same thing about power word kill. Like that's just I'm gonna turn off your lights spell, and like you can do that to anybody. Anybody. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what you are. If Tiamat himself somehow got below 100 hit points, you're dead. If I can somehow get him to fail a polymorph check, guess what? He's dead with power word kill. Like, it doesn't... Like, that, again, so OP if you think about it, because they don't really have any other choice. But it's
this is also why I prefer spell fail, and this is one of the things why I'm not a huge fan of I have a spell slot, so therefore my spell goes off. Like, that's one of the things that I'm not a huge fan.
But is it successful?
But that's what I'm saying. It's like I don't like that 5th edition. The only time that something won't really go off is if there's like a save, like if there's some sort of save throw or something, right? Or like an attack roll. But it really is just spell goes off, or it does. Basically, spells just always go off. Like, there is something I kind of miss about the fact that wizards had even though you're a skilled wizard, you still gotta do it, and you still have a chance of fucking it up. You have the chance of saying the word wrong, getting the thing. I don't know. There is something to be said that I think that's one of the reasons why I do miss it. Or like I love second edition.
I will say, at the very least, there's something to be said for I'm not rolling every single time I'm casting a spell, and so a lot of that spell fail can be accounted for in the times I'm not physically being represented as casting the spell, and the times that I am actually rolling are the times that I am being the most focused and the most deliberate and the most careful about what's happening. So it's a lot less likely, but I do understand what you're saying. It's
the idea that every mage is just always casting their magic without fail. Like, literally, magic, regardless if it hits, magic is always going off. And it's just like, for me, the envisionment of, if you're a magic user, I grab magic, I throw magic. I grab magic, I throw magic. Oh, I missed, but I grab magic, I throw magic. It just feels disingenuous when the idea is that you are saying words, manipulating it, using hand gestures in such a perfect way that there should be I don't know. I feel like there's always a chance that instead of someone having to always interrupt you, yes, you can always have someone do something to interrupt you, but I just don't understand why every mage is perfect. Like, and then there's so many feats you can do, or like even special magics where you can like increase your chance. Like, there is something to be said.
I still like the fact that you can think about it. If somebody gets a natural one on the casting of like a firebolt spell, right? Like, would that be represented as a spell fail?
I think that, in my opinion, in 5th edition, that should be represented as a backfire. A actual net one should be a backfire.
And
not just your spell fizzles. That should be the spell triggers on you. As in, you didn't throw the fireball, it ignited on you.
I like that too.
I think, because again, that also...
But again, it falls along that same category, that spell fail, that opportunity, that chance that it could screw up.
And even if that was available, because again, I feel like magic just almost doesn't have that risk anymore. You know what I mean? Being a magic user is just it's just another weapon to pick up, but it's not, it's like,
would you
even
say
with
there's
weapons, I have
more
of a
risk for a fighter than there is for a spellcaster?
Oh, absolutely. in the grand scheme of things, yes. Depending on the build, spellcasters are typically weaker. They typically don't have as much like action economy in terms of the overall battle. But in terms of how many times you throw an attack, I think melee fighters miss way more than magic users. They granted, because they throw a lot more, right? They attack a lot more.
And theirs are more based on their own skill rather than the other person protecting themselves. Well, because mages have a lot more saving throw things. Like, I can do a lot of stuff that'll still hurt you that requires you to throw a saving throw that means that I don't have to risk failing.
Yeah.
If you're doing a saving throw, I'm not...
And saving throws are usually half damage, not negate damage. And
well,
again, they're
cantrips.
But still, like a lot of times, fireball, you can save and get half, but the spell is still going to go off, right? Like there really isn't as big of a risk as there used to be to wasting a spell. Spells will go off, and you might miss, but you never waste a spell. And I felt like a fighter can waste an attack; he just outright miss, right?
Would you say that's more detrimental, a fighter outright missing a swing and a mage outright missing a shot that they fired? That to you feels worse for the fighter than it does for the mage, because the mage, at least their bolt went out.
I don't think it feels worse. I just think that it doesn't represent magic properly. Again, like imagine how many magic users are out there and just how much magic is going off. And again, because you got to imagine how magic is done, right? It's verbal, symmetrical, material components. It's a process that you have to do. It's not just, I want to do this, therefore it happens. Mm-hmm. So to say that, yes, people can save, you can miss, you can do things that don't get the intended effect. But I have a problem with a fighter missing an attack is going to happen, but a mage never not casting magic.
What if they describe, in the same way you can describe a miss for a fighter as it chinking off their armor or them fully dodging out of the way, could you not also describe a miss for a caster as them literally missing their target or their spell failing and not going off?
You could, but that's not how 5th edition represents it. That's what I'm saying is in the way that 5th edition represents it, there really isn't your magic doesn't work. It's just, did you aim properly?
Right.
But it's just, I don't know. For me, it just doesn't feel correct with the way that I envision how magic is supposed to operate. The idea that magic just goes off, just always will go off with your intent because you want it to, doesn't feel right.
Do you feel like it could be represented that way with this current system, with a mindset such as that? Or do you feel like the entire system would need to change in order for it to be represented anywhere near accurately enough? Or something as simple as just saying, hey, when you miss, it's a misfire.
Well, and that's the problem, right? Because just like with everything in High Point, I always have the balance of how complex and how pedantic do I want to be versus how acceptable should it be to everybody, right? And really what it comes down to, I think, is if I were to be in a perfect world, I would like to see a much better blend between, like a bigger mix between spells that have saves and things and ones that don't, and adding in the risk factor of being a mage. A talented mage is going to have different variants of talent. I think there needs to be a risk factor of you being able to perform the spell in the first place. I think there needs to be a risk there of you being able to not perform the spell. And then, not with every single spell, but there should be...
And it needs to be articulated like that, like this, like specifically being a risk of it not being performed, not of it not working as intended. Those need to be two completely separate risks.
Which is why I like the fact that in 2nd edition it's called spell fail. You have a percentage chance to fail you casting the spell.
That would mean that all spellcasters now have an additional point of failure on top of everybody else. Like any martial fighter, they just miss. But every spellcaster, now you can miss and you can have a spell fail.
True, but guess what fighters also have? I have a D8. So I could miss and not do damage, or I could hit and do 1 point of damage. So not some spells roll damage, some spells just do very few do.
Well, I mean that also does depend on the weapon you're using. You got plenty of powerful magic weapons that do 5d8 plus 10 necrotic damage and all this extra stuff. So
it's a balance, but again, it's because magic is a lot more versatile. So again, the fighter, you have your weapon. Yes, you could change weapon, but you basically are going to be stuck with whatever weapon does the most damage that you can wield. A mage I can do fire if we're in the ice area. I can change up to ice if we're in the fire area. I can do wind when we need it. I can feather fall you if you're about to die. I can help a spider climb up a wall. Whereas you can hit them with the sword, you can hit them with the staff, you can hit them with the dagger, you can shoot them with the bow. Like, yes, one extra point of failure, but it isn't a one-to-one comparison when someone who spent their life wielding the most magical essence that is ever in existence versus someone who picks up a sword. The sword's going to have more attacks. Yes, they'll have less opportunities to miss, but they don't have nearly as much versatility with the types of attacks, with the types of effects they can do, with the sheer power. Like, that sword's only ever going to do a D8. You can be magical, you can do things.
I don't know if we actually had to talk about this, but that was something that I had brought up.
Scaling mundane weapons. We had that whole...
That was definitely in and of itself.
That was a whole... go check out the YouTube VOD, because that was a great episode of Scaling Mundane Weapons. We did that like 3 weeks ago. Such a great episode. But that's the point, right? Is I can upcast a spell. You can't upcast a short sword. You can change the short sword. You can carry a different weapon, but you can't upcast to a larger amount of damage with that short sword unless you have a feat that lets you do extra damage, right? Like a rogue can do sneak damage in those conditions, but at any point, as long as I have the spell slot, I can just ramp it up. Just like the rogue can sneak attack, but once. Then he's not sneaking anymore, right? But he can do it once, just like I can upcast once as long as I have the spell slots. So you're absolutely right. Getting an extra level of barrier does make, and I wouldn't say this to every mage, right? There's things, but I still feel like representing your ability to fail casting that spell, I personally like that. I think it makes being a powerful mage a little bit better, but this is where the big rework has to go into the other aspect, because some spells I think should just be autos. Like if you cast it, it goes off. Mm-hmm. And then I think we need to rework the ones that have saves. Some need to be able to save out. And then some need to have the half. Because that's some of the imbalance that I don't like. If a wizard could fail a spell, that's one thing, that's fine. Like I'm okay with that extra level of barrier. But sometimes I don't like the whole you save and you get half. But at the same time, sometimes I don't like that if you save and you just completely miss, right? Like there are just some things that just don't match up. So I think
I very much agree with that.
I don't want to say the entire magic system needs an overhaul, but what I would like to see is some level of mastery, some understanding that you have trained, but you're still fallible. So whether that's some sort of spell fail, and some level of rework to make things make more sense. Like again, what's the one? Is it like monks unarmored can like basically not take any fireball damage or something? Like, what's the really absurd one?
It's technically rogues, because rogues have uncanny dodge and they have evasion.
Yeah, so it's like you're in the... So you think about how it explodes outward in a sphere. It's an explosion. And it's like, I have uncanny dodge and evasion. It's like, but you can only move so many feet. The explosion's bigger than how far you can move. It's like, but I move. It's like... But you're still in the fireball. Like, you can't dodge a sphere that engulfs you. And that's...
So, I played because I very much agree. I very much agree with that point. And it's a very, very hard mindset to, especially when certain abilities give you certain technical... I get why they want to give people these opportunities.
It's the min-maxing
but
aspect
the
of
opportunity... when they're universal, it makes it hard. But so when we were going back to talking about the spell fail, I played a game very recently where the magic system was very different. And one of the things that they said was there was no more cantrips. There were just straight up leveled spells, right?
Okay.
And also there were no more spell slots. You can just cast your spells. But the way it works is the second you fail casting that spell. Second, I roll to cast it, and I don't pass whatever check is necessary, because there's just like a standard check to see if every spell goes off. Right? And no matter what spell you're casting, you have to roll this check to see if it goes off. The second it doesn't go off, you can't cast it for the rest of the day.
Yeah, okay.
That one spell, you can't cast that spell for the rest of the day.
Okay.
And then the next day, you can cast it again. So you can cast it as many times as you want, as long as you never fail the spell. But the second you fail it, it's out of your repertoire.
That's somewhat akin to like my wizard, where it's you don't really have like a memorized amount of spells. It's more of a... And it's not even really spell slots. It's like more of a fatigue base. You can go until you basically have a pool of, until you pass out, like a pool of energy, right? And again, that's again why I made that one, right? Because even though I do believe in spell fails and then an additional potential failure, yes, it is an additional barrier to entry, but it's not designed to be a one size fits all, right? I'm speaking more from the mindset of like the traditional mage that needs to memorize spells, right? You're doing actions that would potentially let you fail. Now I could see the argument being made for like the traditional sorcerer who's innately imbued with magic, who isn't studying magic. They're not memorizing spells. There's a lot less for them to fuck up because magic's just flowing through them. So maybe they don't have a spell fail feature. You know, that would make sense to me that they don't need the extra spell fail because they're not doing anything memorized. They just feel the magic and go, boo. You know what I mean? That I could make that, you know, I could see that argument being made, right? Like druids, again, they're talking and convening with nature. They're not casting complex magic.
I mean, nature can disagree with them. Like, that could count.
And maybe that's it. Maybe you have something along the lines where it's like the spell fail can also be represented by, like, you know, whether the cleric's doing the bidding of the god, whether the druid is doing their druidic, you know, there's a lot of different ways to represent a spell fail. I feel like not having any mechanic and just saying that all magic is just flowing freely and it just hits you where it doesn't. It just, again, it's for no other, it's not like it's game breaking to me. It just doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel that every time someone wants to use magic,
I do get that
mindset
used. Too.
It just doesn't feel real. It doesn't, I mean, we're talking about magic here, but you know what I mean? It just, if I'm watching like when I watch shows and everybody that ever tries to do magic, it just goes off. It's like, unless you only ever show the masters at work and whenever they do magic, it goes off, and then everybody else, you see them struggling, that's fine because you're trying to show the validity of their masterhood. But in a game where everyone's constantly learning magic and magic just never ceases to stop.
How do you feel Harry Potter did when it comes to in their movies across?
Exactly. No.
Did they demonstrate what spell fail looks like well?
Yes.
Because you had the kids like screwing up the Leviosa and like all the extra whatever.
That's my point. That was because you never saw the headmasters or any of the teachers fail. Like they all just did their magic. But that was to show that is what a teacher, that is what a master at the craft does versus a student. D&D doesn't have that.
So when you're looking at levels, if you were to put, you know, Professor Snape at a D&D character level, are you talking about he's like level 10, level 15?
I mean, Snape would probably be 15 plus. You know, Dumbledore's 20. You would think Snape and most of the other not the headmasters, but most of the other senior staff, they're probably all level 15. And then like the first year teachers are probably all like level 10s.
So you're
because they're looked up to, they're known enough to teach, but then everybody below that, all the other staff that aren't teachers, they're below level 10.
Now, I'm not fully sure how Spellfell works. So if there's a point in time where you master out of Spellfail where that second edition goes down to the point where it's almost nil.
Second edition, it's a percentile roll. It's based on your class and other aspects. And your I think it's your intelligence. It's intelligence. It's based on your intelligence will also modify your spell fail chance.
I think so.
But yes, there are ways both during your character build and through progressing that it will get better. As you level up, that number will go down. And there is a chance that you can get it to 0. Usually I don't let it go to 0 unless it's extenuating. I'll at least bare minimum go to +1. So there's a 1% chance. But yes, that just means that anytime you cast a spell, just roll me a D100, and as long as it's not +1, it goes off. Period. End of story. Some people have a 30% chance of spell fail. Some people have a 1%. Some people start with a 7. Some people start with a 40. Like, it's all about the character build, right? There's mainly about the stats, but there's other factors about your build that can affect it. but it can go down, and it does go down. As you level up, every level, it will go down a little bit. And it is designed to get easier as you become more of a master, but it is always there. It's just, it's that chance that it's just not going to happen. And again, it's kind of like, again, a fighter can miss an attack, but if your spell's always going off and the only thing that could ever possibly make it miss is me as the DM making a bad roll, that's not the same as a fighter having hit an AC. And again, just trying to, use it as another comparison is a fighter has to hit a static AC, whereas most of the time mages have to, hopefully the enemy doesn't roll bad.
I would say there are more attack roll spells than there are saving throw spells for most magic users. I would also say that there are a fair number of just spells that just do stuff that aren't saving throws or attacks. They're just kind of what do you call them? Like kind of utility spells. I would say that spells like that, like one of my favorite spells is Spike Growth, right? I love Spike Growth. It's a really good spell. I think that spell should have like a percent chance to fail.
Yeah.
Because outside of that, there's nothing that's going to stop that from happening. It just happens. Fog cloud. You just make a fog cloud. Like there's no, like I really feel like,
and why should anybody at any level just, unless you've dedicated your life to that spell, why should anybody just always at any time just
I would say that is where my heart for this matter comes into play. Is it's less of every spell needs to have that, and it's those spells that need to have that. So like I wouldn't care about adding spell fail to Firebolt. I wouldn't care about adding spell fail for the most part to spells that have saving throws, right? Because, whether it's a roll on my side or whether a roll on their side, there's still a chance.
You could even just have it to what if spell fails are only level 3 spells and higher? Just, when you get to a spell that's like complex. So you could say second level and lower, even cantrips, are all free. They're so easy. There's no reason why a child couldn't do it. That's why they're cantrips. That's why they're for free. There should be no spell fail. Because I could make that argument. I could easily say that argument of, well, what about cantrips? Well, maybe cantrips are... Now, granted, in D&D, cantrips are way too fucking powerful, in my opinion. I really don't agree with several cantrips that are just...
Interesting.
I'd be very Eldritch Blast? Firebolt? Or is it Witch Bolt?
Witch Bolt's not a cantrip. Okay. Firebolt's a cantrip. It's a D10.
But I'm just saying, like attack spells like that are like literally just... I mean, that's literally just... on the fly magic.
I will say this.
I'm a little hesitant with that.
I have had a very hard time with spell scaling. Okay? And that's just in general because cantrips at low levels are practically useless, but as they level up, they like double in power. Like every single time you hit like 5th level and then 10th level, like your dice numbers double.
Yeah.
And so like Eldritch Blast, like their dice don't double. Your beams double.
Yeah.
Which means you can change target, which is a whole nother can of worms.
And that's what I'm saying. Like, and this is just a as much as I fucking want spell.
And I get the scaling gets kind of crazy because doing a first level spell becomes less powerful than doing a cantrip at a certain point.
Yeah. And like, that's just weird to me.
That's I don't think should. I think spell scaling should be a little bit.
I get the argument that it's something that's I've been doing for a long time and I get better at it. It's like that's true, that's great, but that's why I don't know that this is why I think not a full rehaul or overhaul, but
for sure.
I think Magic has a different approach, and I think there could be a different approach because it maybe I could put it this way: in the sense of D&D lore, Magic is far too obtainable. The barrier to entry on Magic is non-existent. It basically the way that Magic is, and I don't mean that by there's class limitations. There's the ways to lore wise and roleplay wise. There's ways to get into Magic. But what I mean by that is the moment you're a Magic user, you're just using Magic straight out the gate. You're just using it. Period. Now, granted, you may not get the effect, you may not hit somebody, but the fact is you're using it. You're just using Magic because you're a Magic user, and you could be a fighter. You finally want a multi-class. Instantly, you're using Magic. No questions whatsoever. You're instantly casting your spells. You have your cantrips. You're casting... I just don't think Magic should be that easily obtainable, that easily accessible to anyone who wants it. That's my problem, maybe. And again, this is all pedantic. It's not
No,
really
I
a
get you.
mechanic issue, right? It's not about the mechanical issue of it's too easy to cast a spell and we need to make a spell fail because spells are too easy to cast in 5th edition. That's not what I'm saying. I just, from a storyboard point of view, from a lore and setting point of view, just non-failing of magic. Just magic is easy at all. Like, to me, that's almost a plot point for a story. The party goes into a town and magic's prevalent. And everybody can use magic. They go into the, it's early morning. They go into the tavern. They see, like they see the people cleaning up, and then they realize, like, no, the chairs are flipping themselves off the table, and the cups are, sliding themselves into place, and rags are moving themselves on the bar, and someone's lighting the fire with the snap of their fingers. And then over time, you're there and you're realizing, like, everybody's really good at magic here. Not just like really good, like not the fact that everyone has magic. It's flawless, guys. Like, the cantrips are as if they're not even paying attention. You guys see 3rd level spells being cast by like a blink of an eye. You guys are seeing spell magic done in a way that you haven't seen the masters at the college do. To me, if you're telling me everyone's casting magic without flaw, without fail, just, maybe the intention's not perfect, but magic's just always going off. To me, that's more of a what the fuck. Like, I as a player would be immediately weirded out. That I mean, think about that, right? You think about magic being real. There's varying levels of people, but then go into a town where anyone you see where does magic is perfect at it. That sounds weird. That sounds like, hey, who's running this town? What's the water like?
Even?
But to tell me, no, that's just how the game works. I made a town full of mages, but the game says everyone's perfect at magic from day one. So This baby, she's 3 years, this little child at 3 years old, finally decided to be a magic user so they can just do cantrips free and easy. What? I mean, I don't buy it.
There are, and I definitely get what you're saying. I'll say there's worlds, there are settings, like if you think about Black Clover, like everybody in Black Clover has the ability to do magic. When you think about what is it called, Academy, My Hero Academia, everybody has a quirk. Like, absolutely, it's normal for people to be special, magical in some way, shape, or form. And so I get that there are settings
and that
where
makes sense
people
because it's unique to them. Like, I don't mind if like with the benders, like with the bending class,
right?
I don't mind that stuff is innate to you. I wouldn't expect the bender to have a spell fail. But if you want to do something super complex, I would make you roll for it, and
for sure.
Maybe you would get the outcome, maybe you wouldn't. But you're gonna do it, right? Because that's not so much a chance that nature and you are having an argument. You know what I mean? Like, you're not gonna be on terms with nature to not do your magic, but your magic isn't a like, again, it's almost like if you learn how to sew, you can't just be like, I'm gonna sew today, and be like, I can't today, I can't sew. That, you know what I mean? Like, saying, well, that's magic, right? I have a spell fail, so I just can't sew today. That's different. If you learn how to sew and you're like, oh, I got that stitch wrong. Well, I mean, it worked. It's still a sweater. The design messed up. That's the difference between, like, the bending class. You're gonna sew. You're still gonna be able to do what you know how to do. You just might fuck it up once in a while.
Right.
The pattern might not look good. You might make a stitch wrong, but it's still gonna be the cloth. You're still gonna have done the stitching. Whereas with magic, where you got to do all this complex stuff, sometimes you're just like, like cooking. Sometimes you're not going to have the right ingredient. Sometimes you're going to burn something, and guess what? You burned it too early, the whole dish is ruined. Whereas if you make a wrong stitch in a sew, you're still going to kind of complete the sew, right? You're still going to complete the cloth. Whereas with cooking, you may fuck it up early on, and that's it. You don't have the right ingredient, you're not making the recipe. And that's how I kind of maybe think about why spell fail makes sense, is some magics need that barrier.
Yeah.
Some, not all. And you were right to say that, there would need to be some level of barrier, some sort of understanding. And that's why, again, why I've redesigned it, right? Like with Wizards, right?
I'm definitely thinking about, like, how to make magic feel better. Because right now, the way I think 5th edition does it, the way I think most systems have done it, it doesn't feel right. And I know it's really hard. Like, this is phenomenal, but I do think it can be like, when somebody goes into one of these fields, they're gonna have to want to go into one of these fields and like and know about it. And I know that
it's not a dabble. You don't just oh, I want to try that. But then again, that's how High Point is. High Point isn't a,
and I very much appreciate that about it, because there's so much more to it than something like I would create that's just lightweight, one size fits all.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And like, I don't necessarily want it to be like that, but
well, and with High Point, mainly because because I don't do one shots, because I don't just sit here and think of, scenario and room and dungeon after dungeon after dungeon, because I like the story and the narrative and the living world of High Point. That does come with some limitations, because I don't have players who create 90 different characters. I don't run, you have like 3 characters, but you don't have 19. I don't run people through a character until it's dead instantaneously, or have them go until they're tired and want to go do something else. I try to make it to where the character you wanted to play is enticing enough that you just keep wanting to play it. You can change it at any point, but I don't want High Point to be that whole rinse and repeat. I just want to like churn out characters and play different stories and try different things. But not a lot of people like that. People can't do the long-term goals of, I want to play this character and I want to see it through all the way to the end. So I understand the barrier to entry, and I definitely understand, yes, what I've created is very complex. It's very, some may say it's unnecessary, but again, I don't like the way that Magic technically operates. I don't like the overall concept of Magic. The reason why I created the way that I did is because of what we were talking about. I like the difference of not just how it represents, whereas mages, have to memorize, whereas sorcerers just have it innately, whereas wizards have more of they just push magic around instead of control it. Like, yes, I have all of those differences, but for me, more so than the representation of the use of magic was the defining features of that magic. Whereas we were just talking about earlier, where mages and wizards, they are taking magic in, they're manipulating it, and they're transforming it, and then they're releasing it, right? They're doing all of these things with magic, and they're in control. They're what do I call it? They're literally controlling magic,
commanding the weave, basically.
The weave. Whereas you are on the essence of communication. You are working with magic and nature to commune with it and to be working together. Whereas others,
it's weird. I kind of view it a little bit more like surfing. When somebody's surfing on the water, you're not commanding the waves, but you're finding a way to work with them and to kind of commune with them to accomplish a goal, to do something beautiful. But if the waves weren't there, you wouldn't be doing the thing.
Exactly.
Right? You're not making waves occur. Like, I would say like a wizard makes waves occur, but like a waterbender, I mean, but granted, like a waterbender
it might be. See, yeah, it's kind of hard to decide like how using waves is a little bit of a difficult one, because but yeah, you're on the right track in terms of, I wanted to express that again, like, why should anti-magic field affect every type of magic user when not every type of magic user interacts with magic the same way?
Yeah.
Like a bender, you're using the energies of magic, but you're not manipulating them and taking them out of their natural state. So anti-magic field isn't disrupting, because you're not, like, most people take magic out of something. They take magic out of the ground, out of the trees, out of the animals, out of the air, out of the out of the elements, and then they form it into something that they want, the spell, and then they release it. So what anti-magic field does is basically say, hey, magic, stay put, stay in your natural state. You don't get to be manipulated. You don't get to be taken out of your natural form. You don't get to be transmuted into something new. But that's not what a bender does. When you want the rock wall to come up and block you, you're not taking magic out of the rock. You're not turning rock into something else. You're not changing the magic into what it isn't. You're just saying, hey, rock, be over here now. Be a new form. Work with me, and you're communing with it to be different than it is, but not different than what it is.
Yes.
And that's different because anti-magic field isn't telling the rock not to be rock. It's telling the rock you can only be rock. But you're not saying rock be something else. You're saying rock, just be more rock.
It's almost
be different rock.
I'm trying to find a good way to like put it together, but it almost feels like you're I almost want to say asking the rock to go be something, whereas like wizards would be like, no, that's not it. I'll get there. But yeah, I definitely get the vibe, and I do agree that like there's for sure a difference, another mindset when it comes to how you want to express that. When it comes to natural users, when it comes to people who aren't, trying to be forceful about something, when they're they are. It feels a lot like chi, almost like how monks use the energy in their body, even though they can do stuff like ki blasts, right? Like that's still very different. Like,
just like that, the way that High Point explains that is, again, I've told you all about like the major four that influenced High Point, but there's plenty of other like areas that have influenced High Point in small ways. So the way that I describe monks in High Point, the reason why anti-magic field doesn't work against monks, because they're not using magic, they're using energy. They're mainly spirit energy, but they are using the energy that flows with them. So the way that I explain that, the mechanic that I use in High Point to explain how like basically energy and magic essentially the same thing, like they're all the flows of energy, but it's represented differently and it flows differently. The magic produced by your body is the key. It's your magic. It's literally like the mortal magic. It's mortal. It's your aura. It's what you exude by being an alive creature, by just being alive. Just like trees exude a life. That's what you're tapping into. That's all of the magic. It's just that flow of life energy of different variances. Monks just tap into their own, which is a different, type of magic, and it's a different manipulation. So no outside source can really like stop that from happening, right? But the way that I do that, I have a couple different sources, but the primary two that I use first is Yu Yu Hakusho. I use that anime to basically understand how it represents itself. So I love how the show represents how people found like their superpowers or their manifestations of their energy. I took that from there, and just the idea of like, how they can do like, a Hadouken, but it's them pushing their energy through the world, and it is their own energy. It's not magic. It's not the wind or the air that they're pushing. It's actually just a force of energy that they're waving through.
And you said Hakusho is their own thing in your...
Yes. So that's how I got the Hakusho like class, or it's a class, not really a race, but yeah, that's how I got like the Hakusho race, which is
anybody could learn
to control their own body. Yeah, that's why monks are monks. Anybody can learn it. Just like not anybody can learn magic, because you have to technically be somewhat innately attuned to magic. But yeah, like with monks, as long as you dedicate to learning about it, it's not something that it's something that you can tack onto.
I like it. I like it.
Which is why monk has no restrictions in terms of, I don't think I have any, unless there's a race that doesn't have, for any mechanical reason, like an energy, there's no restrictions on monk.
I'd be curious about a Warforged.
That would be a very interesting conversation to have. But I mean, the Warforged still produces its own energy. It's just not mortal. And it's not like a mortal body energy.
But if you're talking about like soul energy or that type of like, would you classify what they are created with as the same type of energy? Or are they just able to use whatever energy they do have in the same way that a monk would use their soul energy?
I've never really thought about a Warforged monk in terms of like in the energy uses. I'll have to think more on that. I don't think there would be any limitation on it. It's just because whatever makes them alive would produce the same type of energy that a monk would have flowing through your body, right? Like the life energies, spirit energy is a little bit different, but life energy, the essence of mortality is kind of what that energy is. So I could see a Warforged having it, but it may manifest differently just because it's a different.
That's fair.
It's a different resource. But yeah, it's super fascinating, the concept of just how you believe magic works and how it should work and how that should operate.
Very much so.
But yeah, that was way off topic. But I mean, we already kind of finished our topic.
Lightweight,
but
yes,
that was yeah. But yeah, in the end, I think we'll just kind of we'll probably close it up here. By the way, Cosmic, to answer your question, I don't know enough of the deck of many things off the top of my head to be able to just answer that. That's a good question, though. We should write that in the Discord, and maybe that should be like part of the lightning round.
Okay.
Later, like whenever we do that, because I do like that question. I don't know off the top of my head all the cards, so I couldn't properly answer that. But I'll have to do some research and get back to you on that one. But yeah, so really quick, kind of going off of that that last like half-hour tangent, going back to our original topic for removing cursed items. So when it comes down to rules as written, the book has kind of gone back and forth, but for the most part, it has stayed relatively encouraging on the DMs to make the entire experience worthwhile instead of trying to make it a hard and fast, these are the things that can curse you, and this is how you remove curses. It seems like from every single edition, D&D has constantly been the whole, hey, curses are cool. We love curses. They're great. They're great tools. You make them fun. like have fun. Make it entertaining. Work with your players. Add the story. Add it into the gameplay. Don't just make it a, hey, you now have a permanent -2 to your AC, but you get a permanent 2 to, your hit. Like, don't just do that. D&D wants you to make it encompassing into the narrative, into the story, and they want you to make it fun for your players. Not necessarily, and I don't necessarily think that means that you have to make a boon. I don't necessarily think that means that it has to have a active positive.
Very much so.
But we talked about, whether or not they can or can't get rid of it, that's up to you guys. But it doesn't necessarily have to have a positive effect in order to be entertaining or to be fun for the players to use. The effect just has to be balanced between taking something away that they may or may not like, but also providing something that... Again, I'm trying to think of a good example, because again, it's not just about like giving them something that, they can use and giving them something that they dislike but is worse, but giving them the freedom of understanding of, yes, you have a downside, because you can go the traditional route of, you just can't get rid of it until you do XYZ. Because then it's just, then it's just a slog. Then you're just like, okay, now it's just a negative. Mm-hmm. But, giving them a reason to have fun with it, whether that is narratively, where it's, you think that you are actually way better looking with this on, like, like it's a hat or something. Like, you really think you're good looking, like, so it's more of, that's your enticement. That's the way to make the player feel good. Maybe it gives them a -5 to their charisma. So that's it. They think they're the hot shit wearing it, but it's a -5 to their charisma. Not game breaking.
They just find themselves failing over and over and over again on charisma.
And they have to convince themselves it's their fault. It's the other person's fault. They go hit on somebody and they fail. And they're like,
anytime someone's like, it's the hat, bro, and he's like, no, it's not.
Dude, I'm just too good for them. They look, she didn't insult me. She realized I was way too good for her and saved me the trouble. You know what I mean? Like, that could be fun for the player to have. Like, it sucks to have a -5 to your charisma. It sucks that you can't be good in dialogue, but to kind of roll around with this like fun character perk of, everyone's just thinks I'm the hot. Everyone just loves me. I'm just so good looking. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that could be fun. That is the positive. It doesn't have to be a positive effect, but you can't just be like, hey, by the way, you have a -5 to your charisma, and you have to wear this dumb hat now. Deal with it. Like,
sucks to suck. But
giving them something to have fun with, whether it's a positive effect, whether it's a role play that they have to do, it just those are those little things where giving the cursed item some sort of interactive aspect. Maybe I
very much agree with that.
Maybe it just has to be interactive. Again, you can have a cursed item that only gives you negatives, but it has a personality that only the person with the cursed item can hear. That right there can be enticing until they get rid of it, because you can have conversations. You can whisper in their ear. You could make them look like a crazy person, because whenever they talk to the curse, they have to talk out loud. They can't talk in their head. You know what I mean?
Facts.
Like, there's so many ways that you could make this so much more interesting, that it doesn't just have to be I want to punish you, or I want to make this next part difficult. It can really, the best curses are the ones that the players aren't sure are actually curses. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, the best curses are the ones where it's like, I don't like this. Like, and again, not the character. The character can be forced to think whatever they want, but it's the ones the players aren't sure they want to get rid of.
Right.
So yeah,
Legitness.
that was our history walkthrough of removing cursed items. We also went through a couple other random tangents. I mean, we have been going at it for 3 hours. We hit the 3-hour mark today. That is pretty
Wow.
damn good for a Friday.
Impressive.
But yeah, that is going to be us for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I really hope you guys had a good week behind you. I hope you have a good weekend ahead of you. We will be back on Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for more D&D discussions. Oh, we got a new follower. Game Masters Vault, thank you so much for the follow.
Very
Hopefully you
nice.
enjoyed today's episode. We do stream every Monday and Friday. I would say without fail, but, minus being sick or out of town. But yeah, every Monday and
Sometimes.
Friday. On Mondays, we are here at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Fridays at 7:30 Pacific Standard Time. Mondays, we do our homebrew reviews. So we take items that are submitted from our viewers, and we will go over them. We kind of just do a first reaction. We read through them, give them our ideas, maybe give them some ideas of what we would do as DMs or as players with the object, and just kind of go over it and have a lot of fun. We're actually pretty low on items right now, so I'm going to drop the Discord link in chat. We need items, ladies and gentlemen, because as of right now, we had to, I don't want to say we bumped an item. We had a review for Monday, and it's turned out to be something a little bit bigger.
It's
than
evolved.
Yeah. It's a
Invent
lot more
loves
involved.
giving me details, and Invent is fire at it.
Yeah, Inventorology has a big one for us, but it's starting to fall outside of the scope of homebrew review. So we want to dedicate a whole Friday to that instead of a Monday, because it's more of it's a whole thing. It's a whole setting, a situation. It's an encounter with potential different levels, and he just kind of wants to go over some details. But it's a little outside of a homebrew review, where it's more of we take a snapshot of something and really talk about its viability. So we'll be doing that on a different Friday. Right now, if we don't get another object or another submission over the weekend, we're probably gonna have to do a high-low, which will be Kage's very first to do a high-low.
I'm not saying don't submit something, but I am saying I'm very interested to actually see what one of these high lows actually looks like.
It's so funny because I only ever did high-low when you weren't here. That was just to
to stand by so that I could be here for a review, so you didn't have to do it twice.
Yeah, exactly. And now we finally might do a high-low with you. So yeah, so we can look forward to that. And then I think next weekend on Friday, for our deeper discussions episode, we will be covering wild magic. So next Friday, we are going to cover the history of wild magic and all of the additions. And we're going to kind of just do like we did today with removing cursed items. We're going to give our interpretation of what which edition we think did the best, what we would have done over the course of each change, and what we think of wild magic now and what we do with wild magic. So if you like that idea, if you like today's episode, stick around for next week, or not stick around, but join us.
Come on back.
Join us on next Friday. That will be the wild magic discussion. Join us Monday for probably a high-low unless we get a new submission. I also do game streaming on the weekends and sometimes during the week. So if you like any of that, join me there. Pop in, say hi. We'd love to see you. And if you like this video and you want to see anything else that we've done before, all of our live streams are on our VOD channel on YouTube right now. So I'm going to pop that link one more time in the chat. So if you guys want to go see any of our other live streams, you can check them out there. But that is going to be us. I hope you guys have a great weekend ahead of you. Join us on Monday, and I might be streaming some games this week. And I think tomorrow I might be doing some Hitman, and definitely tomorrow and Sunday we have some Sea of Thieves grinding I have to do with Vixie. So catch me if you want to do some games. Otherwise, I will see you guys Monday. Thank you guys so much. Have a great weekend, guys. Cheers.
Deuces, my friends.